Chapter 1305. A single stomp. Bao Yujiang gathered his wits and quickly turned over to look at Zhuo and Lu Ruyan with cupped fists. Schoolmaster Zhua, Schoolmaster Lu, is this lady a disciple from your school? Ruyan had a smile that wasn't a smile while Zhenshi only elegantly chuckled and stared at Li Qie. Though he didn't show any mercy in his beating, it carried good intentions. Li Qie looked at Ruyan and chuckled. The Celestial Pavilion does indeed have some ties with me. With that, he didn't say anything else. Do you want to oppose the Lunar Grasp Fairy? Zhenshi asked with concern. Even though the world believes that Meng Zhentian will become the next emperor, I heard my ancestors say that if the fairy comes out and wants the throne, even Zhentian will have to stand to the side. Ruyan added, the lifelong rival of Empress Hong Tian, as beautiful as a fairy. I would like to see her. There were too many legends about her in Heaven's Spirit. She had lived for such a long time that the moment she came out, her prestige would overwhelm even Meng Zhentian. Li Qie remained quiet with his eyes closed, refusing to respond to the two. After a while, the confused fairy asked, where are we going? She seemed to be lost in thought all the time. No one knew what was on her mind. The Bone Sea. Li Qie looked at her and answered, that place will help you remember. Maybe you will even get something good. The Bone Sea. Fairy tilted her head as if she was trying to remember something, but it was only an ephemeral flash that she couldn't grasp. Let's go, you'll find that this is a place worth visiting. Li Qie gently stroked her hair. She nodded while contemplating his words. Chapter 1306. Sima Yujian. The boat of the Evil Devourer School continued onward. Because Li Qie was not in a hurry, its speed was quite slow. Many cultivators from behind surpassed them. Today, it suddenly stopped. After noticing the situation, Ruyan asked, what happened? A disciple immediately reported, Schoolmaster, someone is in our way and won't let us pass. Who is in our way? Ruyan frowned and thought about some possibilities. Not too many people in Heaven's Spirit would dare to stop the Void Imperfection School. Sima Yujian from the Swift Dao Holy Land. The disciple revealed the name. After hearing this, Ruyan and Zhenshi looked at each other before going outside. There was a girl standing above the blue sea. The ocean seemed to be freezing due to her presence. She emitted a chilling aura that spread throughout the entire region. Anyone would shiver after sensing this cold and heartless aura. She looked very young, even younger than Zhuo. Her gray dress was very simple without any adornments. Her simplicity was different from others. It was a style that rendered everything superfluous, like a weapon for murder without any unnecessary parts. Her hair draped over her shoulder as she wore an ice-cold expression. Her gaze infiltrated the soul. Upon closer inspection, one could see a fiery bloodthirst surging deep in her pupils. Anyone would quiver when staring into her eyes. In terms of coldness, Li Shuangyan and Bai Zhenjin were both cold. However, there was a distinction. Li Shuangyan was an apricot flower standing strong amidst a blizzard, while Bai Zhenjin was like the chill of steel. Meanwhile, this girl had a frigid ruthlessness capable of killing anything and everything. She was the sharpest edge that could penetrate someone's heart at any moment. With an oval face and clear complexion, she was actually quite beautiful. The sparkle of her eyes made them seem like gems, and her lips were as red as flames. Her features made others think of a particular phrase. A beauty was as precious as jade. Moreover, her figure was also excellent. Her exquisite curves were clear with a single glance. She had a tight belt that accentuated her figure even more, especially her plump breasts and round buttocks. It was a sight that brightens the eyes. Unfortunately, people wouldn't notice her pretty face due to the murderous intent being exuded from her body. Many would retreat instead of approach. Her bloodthirst overshadowed her beauty. Many cultivators would actually take the long way around or simply observe from a distance when she was around. Sima Yujian. Some from the Abyss Sea were alarmed to see her. The most famous assassin in Heaven's Spirit, and the youngest one at that. People were shocked after hearing her name. Ruyan and Zhenshi came out and saw the girl. Ruyan's eyes glimmered as she murmured, Sima Yujian. This was a name that would instill shivers into the heart of listeners. A charming spirit spoke. A genius with incredible potential. What a shame that she chose the path of assassination. Another cultivator from the Abyss Sea felt regretful as well. The Swift Dao Holy Land should have had two wondrous geniuses. What a pity. Yujian came from an imperial lineage, the Swift Dao Holy Land. Her talents were exceedingly high. After joining the sect, her cultivations suddenly flourished. In this aspect alone, few youths in Heaven's spirit could compare to her. Unfortunately, someone else started cultivating even faster than her later on. Her junior brother, the Swift Tao celestial god. Rumor has it that his cultivation speed broke all records, even exceeding their own progenitor, immortal Emperor Su Dao. There were 6 different levels for God Kings: Grand God King, Heavenly God King, Supreme God King, Apex God King, Dominating God King, and 9 Worlds God King. On the side, Ruyan chuckled a bit after hearing Yu Jin's response. Young Noble Li is our guest. If you want to harm him, you will have to get past us first. Yu Jin coldly glanced at her and mercilessly said, as long as someone pays, I won't mind killing you two as well. So you're saying that someone paid you to kill me? A leisurely voice sounded as Li Chia came out from inside. Fierce is here. Many people shouted after seeing him. His fame was no lesser than Sima Yujin's. Her eyes were instantly fixated on him. They emitted a terrifying glint as if they could penetrate his body. Many people felt their bodies being pierced by razor-sharp swords under her sweeping glance. However, Li Chia didn't care at all. He looked at her and smiled. I'm actually curious, who paid for my life? He looked very nonchalant, as if he was talking about the weather. He didn't show any signs of the fact that Yu Jin was here to take his life. Other people would be scared to death and drop to the ground or act quite cautious. Can't say. Yu Jin coldly replied. I'll come for your life in 3 days. The crowd was astonished. Her actions demonstrated her great confidence. In fact, this was her typical style, informing people before killing them. Chapter 1307. Dark Corpse Evil Water. Li Chia couldn't help but laugh and shake his head after listening to Yu Jin. He replied, such a vulgar action, hiring an assassin. Okay, I don't care who wants to buy my life. I'll pay you 10 times more. What do you want? Immortal Emperor refined jades, imperial weapons, or supreme manuals? Just say the word. The crowd was dumbfounded after hearing this. Everyone thought someone as fierce as Li Chia would immediately erupt in anger upon finding out that someone wanted his life. A fight would then ensue. No one expected for him to act as if he could smash someone to death with just money. He directly mentioned Immortal Emperor refined jades and imperial weapons. This youth was far too rich. He really could kill someone with wealth at any moment. Yu Jin coldly said, the buyer has already made the payment. Li Chia shook his head. No problem, everything is negotiable in business. Just tell me what you want. I don't need you to tell me who the buyer was, you just have to kill him. I'll repay this lowly act in the same manner. Tell those who want my life that I have too much money and will pay 10 times what they can afford. Many were speechless. This was completely contrary to their image of Li Chia being a warmonger. Right now, he was acting like a young master who had just fallen into wealth and wanted to show off his money. Yu Jin didn't agree with his request. Instead, she coldly uttered, prepare for your funeral, I'll take your life 3 days later. Fine, if you want my life, why wait? Take it now. Li Chia smiled and suddenly teleported behind her before finishing his sentence. He was way too fast. The majority of the crowd didn't see how he got behind her. In this split second, Yu Jin also took action. Her sword silently flashed like a scorpion, delivering a fatal sting under the guise of night. This sword glint was incomparably fast as it aimed for Li Chia's chest. There was no technique behind it, only pure murderous intent. This direct prick could pierce through his abdominal cavity. She might be fast, but he was even faster. His 2 fingers immediately clamped the blade. However, this flashing edge seemed to have a life of its own as it jumped up to evade him. Just like that, it pierced through his clothes and made contact with his flesh. A section of his skin was revealed. The sword move didn't make full contact with him. Yu Jin immediately retreated with extreme speed the moment Li Chia's skin was exposed. The sky was filled with her shadows. No one could tell which was real or fake. A bit interesting. Li Chia smiled at this scene. He stretched out his palm. Whoosh! A black hole emerged as Li Chia's vitality soared. The black hole expanded as if it wanted to devour this whole region. Heaven Devourer Evil Fist. This fist could devour all existences in the world with its tyrannical power of absorption. Once locked onto by this attack, no one would be able to escape. The shadows in the sky couldn't escape. all was devoured by the black hole. In the end, only one shadow was left. She flew away from the black hole like a ray of light with incredible speed, successfully fleeing. "How far can you run?" Lichia laughed while watching the fleeing girl. He took a single step on the ocean and traveled 1,000 miles in order to capture her. Pluff, pluff, pluff. He was right behind her when countless arrows shot out from the void. These arrows were quite fast as they penetrated the fabric of space. One could hear space being torn apart by their barrage. The terrifying aspect of these arrows wasn't their speed, it was their material. They were made from refined white bones and carried an extremely terrifying corpse energy. The type of miasma trailing from these arrows was the real weapon. This energy held great destructive force and was capable of killing everything in its path. One could easily tell that they were crafted from some horrifying skeletons. Once hit, even if the impact didn't kill the enemy outright, the corrosive force of this corpse energy would destroy the body and true fate. Sima Yujian came prepared without a doubt. She had come up with a path of retreat and laid these arrows beforehand. Lichia didn't bat an eye against this oncoming onslaught. He casually pointed forward and space rippled. Even though Lichia was standing right there, the spectators started seeing a strange illusion. The space surrounding him seemed to be liquefying. The fast arrows were going through this watery space right for Lichia, but strangely enough, they didn't make contact with his body. After they reached his flesh, Lichia's body suddenly turned into air as space was restored to its initial form. The arrows all disappeared as if they were never shot in the first place. This was space displacement, a technique from one of the 4 space-controlling arts of the space scripture. It could move space around in the blink of an eye. Because of this, all of the arrows failed to hit Lichia's body since they were transferred to a different space. With this opportunity, Yujin decisively escaped even further away, not daring to stop for a second. The space Lichia was standing on suddenly lost all gravity. With a strange noise, a drop of water floated up from the sea. A drop of seawater shouldn't be special at all, but the moment this drop touched Lichia, it wrapped around him completely. Moreover, this single droplet immediately became huge. It sealed his body completely and began to slowly petrify him in a block of amber. At first, everyone thought that this was another trap left behind by Sima Yujian. However, they felt that something was amiss because Yujian was nowhere to be found. If this was another attack from her, she wouldn't have escaped this quickly. Gensher was startled and immediately warned Lichia. "Watch out, this is the Dark Corp's evil water." He, you are indeed a schoolmaster. How knowledgeable, to be able to recognize my ultimate treasure." A gloomy laughter resounded at this moment. Continuous splashing noises came from the water. Next, a person with a sinister smile surfaced from the sea. The moment people saw who it was, they shivered in fear due to his horrific appearance. The man had a big, round fish head with many thorns protruding from it like needles. Despite having a human body, many tentacles branched off from his body. These tentacles were very small, only around 3 to 5 inches long, so they looked like extra lumps of meat. These lumps were all moving, instilling chills into the spines of the spectators. Moreover, they were as black as ink with poisonous juices leaking out. A schoolmaster recognized who he was and exclaimed in horror. "Thornspur Ancestor." Thornspur Ancestor? Some people had never seen him before, but they had heard of this name. That's the man whose body is poisonous through and through, right? He, I haven't been out all these years, yet someone still remembers my name. The Thornspur Ancestor was happily feeding off the fear of others with a smug expression. Thornspur belonged to a branch of sea demons, an extremely rare branch. Members of this branch were born with toxic bodies. Anyone who made contact with them would be poisoned to death unless they were strong enough to withstand the toxins. Because of this characteristic, they could kill in secrecy. Thornspur was special among them. He himself was a virtuous paragon and had killed many great characters in the past with his poison. Ha, Junior, you might be strong, but there is no escape from my Dark Corp's evil water. The ancestor stared at Lichia trapped in the bubble and deviously laughed. Blame the person who paid the high price for your life. I'll turn you into amber before going to collect my bounty. Is that so? After the ancestor's gloating, Lichia unexpectedly went outside of the water that was sealing him. No one saw how he escaped. How? Thornspur was completely stunned and aghast. Trying to seal me with such a petty trick? Lichia sneered. After training with the space scripture, Not to mention this type of water, even the most heaven-defying sealing technique would find it prohibitively difficult to imprison him. Chapter 1308. Provocation. The Thornspur ancestor was shocked at the failed suppression and knew that the situation had gone sour. He turned to flee because he knew of Li Qie's fierce reputation. He initially wanted to ambush Li Qie with his most terrifying dark corpse evil water, but after failing, he didn't dare to linger here any longer. Stay and play. Li Qie suddenly appeared in front of him. The frightened ancestor immediately changed directions and fled towards the horizon, but he couldn't escape. Li Qie blocked his path again. The ancestor shifted once more, but Li Qie was much faster in stopping him. The ancestor's expression turned unsightly. He knew that his speed was inferior to Li Qie's, so escaping was impossible. He could only risk it all at this moment. Since you can't run, you might as well die. Li Qie laughed and declared after seeing that the ancestor had given up on running. With that, his finger aimed straight for the ancestor. It was just a very casual touch without any destructive force. The ancestor didn't try to dodge and instead rushed forward. It was as if he had become suicidal and wanted to be pierced by this finger. Pluff! Unsurprisingly, Li Qie's finger pierced the ancestor's chest. Many people were confused by his actions and the intended consequences. Not good. Li Qie fell into the trap. You can't touch the Thornspur ancestor. His entire body is poisonous. An older cultivator reacted right away with a shout. Although being pierced left him with unbearable pain, the ancestor still gave a devious smile with a gloating demeanor. Little animal, you are truly strong, but you will still die to me. Even if you are a god monarch, you won't be able to survive. The poison from my body is 100 times stronger than the external ones I can create. The crowd was dumbfounded after hearing this. They knew that he was poisonous, but not to this extent. It really was a trap. An old cultivator murmured, if his natural poison is really that strong, it will be insufferable even if Li Qie could escape death. Li Qie was not surprised at all. He chuckled in response. This is considered acute poison? What a joke. You think this can kill me? The gloating ancestor suddenly stopped after seeing that Li Qie was just fine standing there. He cried out, impossible. Nothing is impossible in this world. Li Qie smiled. He cultivated the void imperfection physique, so even if this poison was stronger, it wouldn't hurt him in the slightest. Having said that, he slammed his palm into the ancestor's chest. The palm became infinitely dazzling as if he was holding a sun. Ah! The ancestor screamed pitifully. His chest was being incinerated, then his entire body turned to ashes. He couldn't escape at all since this scorching fire torched him in a split second. Extreme Yang Fist. The ancestor's poison trap backfired on him. He allowed Li Qie to get close only to be burned by Li Qie's fist. Li Qie patted his palms clean and flatly said, trying to kill me at your level? Many cultivators on the sea surface were alarmed after seeing this and quietly stared at each other. They had heard of Li Qie's reputation and he lived up to it today. A poisonous creature like the Thornspur ancestor was easily annihilated by him. Even the frightening Sima Yujian almost got killed as well. They trembled and thought about staying away from him in the future, in order to avoid an indignant death. After Li Qie returned to the boat, Ruyan ordered her disciples to embark on their journey once more. Sima Yujian then the Thornspur ancestor. Gensher spoke after Li Qie sat down. The bounty must be very high for people like them to take action. Not many can afford this price in Heaven's spirit. It's no big deal. Li Qie smiled a little without a care in the world. In fact, he had a pretty good idea of who placed the bounty on his head. Ruyan chuckled and added, wealth moves the heart and bounty invites brave people to accept challenges. That's fine, the more the merrier. Killing a few 100,000 will only be a warm-up. Such a casual remark left the two girls silent. For cultivators, killing was a way of life in order to improve. However, Li Qie's style of murder was different as shown by his earlier conquests. Calling him fierce was a polite way to put it since he was more of a butcher. Sima Yujian is actually a bit interesting. Li Qie commented while the two girls had wry smiles on their faces. Gensher replied, she is indeed a rare genius. Unfortunately, she was born in the wrong generation, having to meet her junior brother and master. Otherwise, she would be the current sect master of the Swift Dao Holy Land. If she had stayed at the Holy Land and the Swift Dao God didn't exist, Maybe she would have been the youngest person to be recognized by the heaven's will and heaven's spirit. Ruyan chuckled and added, her talents are incredible, plus that Holy Land is known for its cultivation speed, making her a tiger with wings. The Swift Dao Holy Hand was created by immortal Emperor Su Dao. He didn't have as many eternal tails as the other emperors, but he created a supreme grand Dao, allowing for the fastest cultivation speed in this world. It could be said that under the same conditions and aptitudes, cultivating his emperor law would double the speed of other emperor laws or more. This was the reason why their disciples improved much faster than those of any other lineage. I'm talking about her assassination arts. Li Qie smiled. Assassination arts? Zhenshi asked, young noble, do you know the origin of her tactics? Sima Yujian had never returned after leaving the Holy Land. By the time she showed herself again, she had already become a frightening assassin. People said that from that day onward, she stopped using merit laws from the Holy Land. Because of this, many believed that she had created a supreme Tao of assassination. Li Qie only smiled without responding. At this point, the boat suddenly stopped again. Ruyan frowned and asked her disciples, what is it this time? A disciple came in and reported with a strange expression. Something is happening outside. She inquired. What's the matter? The disciple hesitated and glanced over at Li Qie, but he didn't know how to phrase his words. Eventually he stammered. Someone has put a sign in the ocean. Let's go take a look. Li Qie noticed his demeanor and smiled before walking outside. There was a floating buoy with a particular message. Li Qie will die if he goes this way. There was also an arrow above the words pointing forward. They were large enough to be visible from a distance. Many cultivators saw the message as well and started to whisper to each other. This was blatantly provoking Li Qie. Without a doubt, this was creating an irreconcilable feud with him. Zhenshi grimaced and said, someone is trying to goad you into a trap, young noble. Li Qie revealed a smile and replied, I actually want to see what they can do with this trap. It's not Sima Yujian. Ruyan stated her opinion. Zhenshi gently shook her head. I think so too. Despite being an assassin, she still has the pride of a great genius. She wouldn't bother using this type of scheme. Li Qie looked over at the direction of the arrow and cheerfully commanded, go that way. But what about the trap waiting for you? Zhenshi was rather worried. Li Qie answered, I'll just go alone. I like breaking other schemes and seeing the desperation on their faces. Ruyan chuckled and said, if you want to go, then we will naturally follow you. Not too many people in the contemporary can scare us. Chapter 1309. The trap. The great ship traveled north along the direction of the arrow at a steady pace while remaining cautious. Many cultivators were surprised to see the boat's trajectory. Any reasonable person would know that the buoy from earlier was an attempt to goad Li Qie towards the trap. They weren't willing to be fooled and would rather avoid it completely instead of being led by the nose. Everyone knew that Li Qie was aware of this trap, but to their astonishment, he still chose to go towards it. Knowing that there is a tiger on the mountain yet still choosing to climb. How bold and decisive. What a confident person. Even sea demons unavoidably felt a little admiration for Li Qie. Prudence allows for a ship to sail 10,000 years. An old cultivator murmured, the path towards the Tao is endless with countless dangers. If not careful, even the most amazing genius might find their boat capsize one day. Come, let's take a look. I actually want to know who is trying to mess with Li Qie. Some cultivators couldn't contain their curiosity and decided to follow. Someone had already placed a high bounty for Li Qie's head, and now there was this blatant provocation and trap. The person behind this must have an irreconcilable feud with Li Qie. The boat didn't go too far before seeing another message on the sea with an arrow. Li Qie will die if he goes this way. The boat, once again, followed the direction without any hesitation. After some distance, they kept seeing the same sign again and again with a new direction. Just what kind of trap is waiting for him? The quantity of the signs built up the anticipation of the cultivators following behind the boat. Eventually, the boat stopped because of a large sign with Li Qie will die here written on it. There wasn't an arrow above the words this time. The spectators knew that the trap was before them, so they stopped to watch from afar. Li Qie told the two girls, stop here, I'll go take a look. Be careful. Zhenshi reminded him after seeing that he wanted to go alone. Don't worry, I actually want to be killed. Li Qie looked at her and smiled. It will be a good thing. The two sisters were speechless. This was their first time hearing someone who wished to be killed. Li Qie slowly walked on the waves towards the sign in front of him. He seemed to be taking a stroll through his own garden instead of walking towards a trap. The sea demons in the distance were surprised by his carefree demeanor. One of them said, "This Li might be arrogant, but he can really back it up. Courageous and domineering. A very unique individual even among the young geniuses in Heaven's spirit. It's about to begin. I wonder how strong his enemies are." Some spectators were holding their breaths in anticipation. They didn't want to miss a single detail. Some wanted to see just how strong this trap was and if it could deal with Li Qie or not. Li Qie glanced at the buoy and casually threw it away before smiling. "Come, do your worst and impress me." Boom, boom, boom. At the initial location of the buoy where Li Qie was standing, great pillars soared into the sky from the bottom of the sea. They surrounded this region and runes began to appear on their surfaces. Clank! These runes instantly connected with each other like iron chains and sealed the entire area. Whoosh! They emitted a powerful aura and a blinding light. Even space seemed to be frozen. A spectator blurted after seeing this brilliance, "The aura of a sea god. This is a sea god's method." Now that the nearby space had been frozen by the pillars, they began to emit an energy to suppress Li Qie and cut off all paths of retreat. These are items personally refined by a sea god. Someone commented after seeing some clues on the pillars. A cultivator asked, "Which sea god?" The paragon slightly opened his mouth, but he refrained from answering. He didn't want to expose the background of the sea god. After all, he and Li Qie didn't know each other. There was no need for him to run his big mouth and provoke a sea god's lineage. Baz! When Li Qie gathered his blood energy, a seal of the sea god surfaced on the pillars in order to suppress his energy. It was immediately successful. Another expert wondered, "I wonder if Li Qie can withstand this level of suppression in that sealed space." Li Qie didn't seem to mind at all and stopped gathering his blood energy. He smilingly said, "Fine, I can still destroy you all without using my blood energy and merit laws. It's time to show me your worth. Don't waste my time." When all of his power was converged, he looked just like a mortal. The crowd was dumbfounded by his actions. Even in the face of a sea god's suppression, he still chose to not use laws and his blood energy. Just how confident and domineering was this? Small buds stretched out of the sea. It looked like new branches were growing from them. Just like that, more and more of these young buds surrounded the sealed area for as far as the eye could see. What is this? The crazy growth of these buds creating a meadow-like location on the sea left many astonished. They didn't know what these buds were. Shortly after, the buds grew into large vines like swimming serpents. They wove together and created a huge net that wrapped around Li Qie. While this was happening, he stood there without moving while watching this scene with a smile. It's the blazing serum tray ant. The nest-like creation formed from these vines was finally recognized by a cultivator. Tray ants emerged from the sea as well as inside the sealed sky. Their heads were skulls while their bodies were made from vines and roots. Their bodies were very muscular, like horned dragons taking root in the sea. They grew with frightening speed and immediately crowded the entire area. Suddenly, huge vines covered everyone's vision. Next, the net made out of giant vines began to rapidly shrink. It seemed to be using a mighty force to strangle Li Qie inside. A different type of sea demon was standing on these gigantic vines as well. Their bodies were transparent like seawater, rendering their organs visible. When their bodies swayed with the vines, liquids continuously gurgled out into the vines themselves. Meanwhile, the vines crazily absorbed this liquid. It looked to be greatly nutritious since the vines could grow even faster to occupy the area. All of this happened very quickly. Starting from the buds until they grew into the entrapping vines, it only took the time it takes to perform a merit law. Escaping this sealed space was truly a challenge. Moreover, Li Qie couldn't move at all since he was wrapped by the vine net. Ice spirit sea demons, no way. A sacred lord from the dragon demon sea was startled. An unfamiliar cultivator asked, "What do you mean?" Ice spirit sea demons and blazing serum tray ants have been mortal enemies for generations. They have always been at odds. This sacred lord blurted out, "But these two races are complementary to each other. The water of the ice spirits is extremely nutritious for these tray ants, allowing them to mature faster. This means that the explosiveness of the Treants would be dozens or 100 times greater in combat. At the same time, the roots and buds of these Treants are also nutritious for the sea demons. All along, the blazing serum Treants wanted to capture the ice spirit sea demons to suck their water dry, while the ice spirits wanted to absorb the blazing serum's roots and refine them into their own treasure liquids. They have massacred each other for generations, so why would they work together like this? Chapter 13:10. Blazing Serum Treants and Ice Spirit Sea Demons boom. The tightly woven net of vines suddenly caught on fire at the center. In fact, calling it a fire was far from sufficient to describe what was going on. This explosion left the net stranded in a sea of fire, making it seem like the sun itself. It immediately spread and exploded some more, emitting terrifying smoke. This ferocious flame swept through the entire area. The fact that the space was sealed exacerbated the scale of this flame of indescribable power. Its high temperature could burn everything to ashes. In this split second, the wooden net was no longer there. Only a gigantic sun with its flames surging for thousands of meters could be seen. These terrifying flames assaulted the world and burned everything. Li Qie, who was stuck in the center, was affected the most. The flame had probably burned him to ashes. The monstrous fire made it difficult for others to look straight at it. Many spectators were slack-jawed. Even a paragon was nothing in the face of this intense heat. This is why the blazing serum Treants are so scary. If they are willing to risk it all by using their lifespan, they could incinerate their own bodies to kill their enemies. A Treant ancestor explained. The presence of the ice spirit sea demons made these Treants grow even stronger and amplified the power of the explosion. Is he still alive? Someone squinted to look at the center of the ball of fire, but the blistering flames blocked their vision. Even a heavenly gaze couldn't see through its blinding light. As the blasts continued, everyone became curious as to what Li Qie's situation was. Suddenly, the flames moved wildly. This sky-searing flame caved in as if something within the artificial sun was devouring its power. More scorching sizzles resounded. The sealed space continued to quake as the blazing sun became smaller and smaller. It was as if it was losing its source of power. Eventually, the sun became small enough for one to see what was happening. Everyone could now see Li Qie frantically devouring this sun flame. He had opened his fate palace. The cauldron of life emerged with the heavenly Tao's primal chapter. The cauldron itself already had an eternal flame of life, while this primal chapter had an affinity for high temperatures. Thus, their combination was fundamentally flawless and allowed for the perfect absorption of all flames. Meanwhile, the blazing flames of these Treants were predicated on them burning their bodies. This type of flame was quite nutritious for Li Qie, so his own fire of life grew much stronger after devouring it. How could he let go when such a good opportunity was brought to his doorstep? He directly used his cauldron of life to turn everything into his own. How can this be? Something like this is actually possible? Many people couldn't believe their own eyes. Everyone knew that the flame of this race was a wondrous substance since they burned their own life force in order to create it. However, not just anyone could withstand such an overbearing fire. Devouring this blazing flame could easily destroy their own cauldron of life. The blazing serum Treants became distraught after seeing all the fire being devoured by Li Qie. The experts of their race shouted, "Combine!" All of their branches grew at an astonishing pace as they took root within the deepest part of the earth. At the same time, the ice spirit sea demons combined with the Treants. Their own bodies merged with the branches, then they poured their spirit water inside. This is so incredible. Seamless cooperation from mortal enemies. Someone must have paid a sky-high price to make them work together like this to kill Li Qie. A sect master was astounded to see this teamwork. At this time, the Treants seemed to be blooming with flowers. However, petals didn't come out from the hollow holes filled with darkness. Rumble! Lava rushed out from these holes. Some sprayed to the sky before aiming straight for Li Qie. Shortly after, lava gushed from all directions, aiming to drown and annihilate Li Qie. The Treants are using their killing move. Do not get hit by this hot serum or you'll explode right away. A Treant expert lost his voice while screaming. The blazing serum from this race was quite terrifying. Not only did it have a high temperature, once it touched its prey, it would seem to come to life and invade the body before exploding. Moreover, the power of this explosion was enormous. It was dozens of times stronger than the flames from earlier. Even the strongest body wouldn't be able to withstand the internal explosions. These serums that resembled lava came tumbling down from the sky, causing relentless explosions. The sealed space trembled, but everyone saw an unbelievable scene. Li Qie's cauldron of life immediately opened wide and crazily swallowed all the incoming serum. It violently quaked as explosions resounded inside. Without a doubt, this serum was detonating within. However, the Heavenly Tao's primal chapter and its laws fortified the cauldron of life by sealing it. The barrage of explosions couldn't harm the cauldron at all. How could these blazing liquids blow away an item at the primal chapter's level? Jaws dropped at this spectacle. Is his cauldron of life made out of immortal metal? It is perfectly fine after this many explosions. Even the strongest God King cauldron wouldn't be able to handle so many powerful outbreaks. A sea demon of the Paragon level was shocked. Rumble! More blazing serum shot out in an endless manner. It crazily attacked Li Qie's cauldron of life as if this Treant race wouldn't give up until he was blown to pieces. A few sea demons were lost in admiration. One of them said, "It is fortunate that these two races are mortal enemies. If they work together, they might become one of the most terrifying lineages in the Dragon Demon Sea." This endless barrage of serum could instantly destroy a great power. No, that's not right. A virtuous paragon from the previous generation was quite experienced. After watching for a while, he shook his head and said, "Something is wrong, they are not in control of their serum anymore." This paragon was right. At this time, the experts from the two races were completely frightened because their serum kept on gushing out. They had lost control of the situation as they kept on feeding Li Qie's cauldron of life as if it wanted to squeeze them dry. Even though their serum was quite powerful and horrifying, it also came at a heavy price. It was equivalent to a cultivator's blood energy, or even longevity blood. This lavish barrage of their serum meant that their longevity blood was being drained. An expert from the Treant race shouted towards the ice spirit sea demons, "Separate." Due to the previous fusion, their serum became stronger and of course, this meant that Li Qie was absorbing an even greater amount. "We can't." These sea demons were alarmed as well. Their spirit water was supporting the Treants and their serum. However, Li Qie was not only devouring the longevity blood of the Treants, he was also sucking them dry since they were one with the Treants. They desperately tried to separate their bodies, but Li Qie's cauldron of life had a formidable swallowing nature. It locked the two races together in a way that they simply couldn't separate. Waves splashed everywhere. Despite the struggles of the two races on the sea, they failed to escape from Li Qie's grasp. Oh mother! This is not the blazing serum Treants attacking Li Qie. He is simply devouring their longevity blood. Finally, people understood the situation and couldn't help but quiver in horror. No! Ultimately, the experts from the two races screamed pitifully. Li Qie had completely devoid them of their energy source. After a couple moments, countless corpses floated on the sea. Chapter 13:11. Sea aberration. Fear spread throughout the crowd as they watched the corpses floating on the ocean. Several hundred ice spirit sea demons and blazing serum Treants were drained dry. All of their blood energy had been devoured by Li Qie. A cultivator murmured while quivering, "This is too terrifying, what an evil art." Another sect master commented, "These two races are done for. All of their elites, even high elders, have died here. They won't be able to rise again. This is the result of greed, participating for an unobtainable bounty only to pay with their lives." Many people quietly reflected on the situation. The two races were mortal enemies, always in a state of discord. But now, they actually worked together for once only to be slaughtered completely. What a tragic tale. That was really filling. Li Qie recalled his cauldron of life and faintly smiled. His eyes then turned towards the sky as he flatly said, "What else you got? Bring it." A thunderous voice came from the sky as if something was blown open. "Show the decree." In an instant, a divine order with a majestic will descended. Its holy text ordered the 9 heavens and myriad realms. Someone shouted in amazement, "The decree of a sea god." This type of decree was written down by a living sea god. The moment it came out, the user would have control over its divinity. Some decrees had specific purposes while others were more general. The former mostly consisted of agreements between a sea god and a certain race or person. After the sea god passed away, The descendants of the other party could also use this decree to command others. A general-purpose decree was a form of willpower used to suppress enemies. It was quite powerful since it represented the sea god. Ordinary cultivators couldn't oppose it at all. This particular decree didn't suppress Lichia. Its holy text and runes fell into the sea and disappeared shortly after. The water was still calm, so no one knew of its effects just yet. Boom! While the spectators were thinking about what the decree would do, a tsunami flooded the sky and flipped over the earth. Rumble! The entire sea quaked with continuous rumbles. Even the sealed space with Lichia inside was quaking non-stop, making it seem as if the seal could break at any moment. Retreat! Lu Ruyan was startled and immediately gave the order. After the boat from the Evil Devourer school retreated, the spectators followed suit. Even though they didn't know what the item was, if the Evil Devourer school chose to retreat, it must be something major. Gigantic tentacles emerged from the bottom of the ocean. Each of them was 1,000 miles long. Boom! They crowded the sealed space and immediately shattered it. The pillars floating on the sea broke apart as well. Rumble! They danced in the sky while wreaking havoc. Each was as long as a mountain range, creating stormy tsunamis that towered for countless miles. The evacuators were shaken to see this scene from a distance. What is that monster? Many people found these gigantic appendages difficult to believe. How could this be? The effect of this decree was beyond their imagination. They didn't think that this monster could destroy the sealed space just by awakening. Of course, some were secretly celebrating after the initial shock because the stronger this sea monster was, the greater the chance of it killing Lichia. Bang! An even more terrorizing scene unraveled. The feelers on these gigantic tentacles began to suck up the water in this region. The seawater here was suddenly being drained away at a rapid pace. The sea surface rose higher and a monstrosity appeared before them. It was a gigantic kraken, capable of easily crushing great mountains. Its body itself was monstrous in size while its long tentacles had huge feelers capable of devouring everything like tiny black holes. The kraken opened its eyes that resembled two bright moons, brightening up the whole sea. What is this sea monster? People gasped in the face of this monster. Everyone could imagine these tentacles easily pinching paragons to death. An emperor kraken, a sea monster that ravaged the dragon demon sea for a short period of time. An old paragon recognized this monster. His eyes flashed with shock as he elaborated. Legend states that a god monarch once challenged this monster but was torn to pieces alive. Later on, this creature met a sea god and disappeared afterward. Who would have thought that it was sleeping here? Sea monsters were unique to the great oceans in Heaven's spirit. There were many of them and they were particularly formidable. They were different from sea demons. Sea monsters didn't cultivate and would maintain their original form. Moreover, they were solitary creatures without groups. Because they didn't have any intelligence and maintained their original form, they could live for a long time and become extremely powerful while gaining unique characteristics. They would either grow to unbelievable sizes or were highly toxic. Some had magical gifts as well. A cultivator curiously asked, "Which sea god was it?" The old paragon didn't want to answer. Of course he knew which sea god subdued this kraken. It was just that he didn't want to invite trouble to himself. The will of the sea god descending from the sky had awakened this slumbering sea monster. Bang! Its huge tentacles immediately attacked Lichia. One could easily imagine their world-destroying power. Space was torn asunder as the winds hissed through the sky. However, before these tentacles could touch Lichia, he instantly disappeared and reappeared on the other end to look at the kraken with a smile. The beast reacted quickly. Another tentacle aimed for Lichia's new location with lightning speed. Alas, even if it was faster, it was no match for Lichia. He disappeared once more to another location. Boom, boom, boom. In just a moment, the kraken's long tentacles slammed down on this world, creating huge tidal waves. A calamity had descended on this sea region. The end of time was approaching. Lichia's figure kept flashing back and forth in the sky. Because his speed of teleportation was too fast, his shadows were left in the sky. Eventually, these remnant images were everywhere. At the same time, the tentacles crazily attacked with enough speed to seem like countless dancing serpents. The sky was full of these tentacles as well. The spectators were dazed from this dance between the two combatants. They were truly too fast. No one could see them clearly. Bang! At this moment, The kraken that was using the seawater to float higher fell down. Monstrous waves were generated from its impact. At this point, people saw a bizarre scene. The winding tentacles of the kraken were unexpectedly twisted together. It had become a giant meatball, struggling to loosen the knots. Alas, the more it tried, the tighter the tentacles became, as if they were trying to strangle it to death. "You dare to prance around in front of me with your low intelligence?" Li Qie looked at the desperately struggling kraken. Li Qie deliberately planned a route during his evasion so that the attacking tentacles would tie each other into an inescapable knot. Everyone looked dumbfounded to see this giant meatball. The kraken's body couldn't support its current posture and sank into the sea. Chapter 13:12. 5 generals. Li Qie rushed down towards the sinking kraken and grabbed one of its tentacles. Splash! Li Qie then soared to the sky and dragged the monster up with him. Whoosh! 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 The wind cried. Li Qie spun the kraken around continuously like a windmill. They turned into a terrifying hurricane that crazily spun on the sea's surface. Now go! Li Qie eventually let go. Whoosh! The gigantic body of the beast flew and disappeared into the sky like a shooting star. It had been thrown out of the dragon demon sea towards the boundless horizon. Who knows whether this kraken would be able to survive in the future? He dealt with it just like that? Jaws dropped to the ground. However, some experts felt that this was the best way to deal with the kraken. Such a sea monster had a resilient shell. Killing it in a short period of time wasn't an easy matter. Directly throwing it out of the sea was much simpler. Li Qie then stepped towards the sky and stomped on a white cloud. Boom! The cloud dissipated along with a secret technique, revealing a huge ship. There's no need to sneak around if you are already here. Li Qie stood in the sky and sneered at the exposed ship. Go! 2 shadows rushed out of the ship in order to escape. However, they didn't make it far before a bang sounded. They had slammed into something and were bounced back. They immediately changed directions with haste. Alas, the result was still the same. They slammed into something again and was forced back. This process repeated several times, but nothing changed. This space was sealed, so they couldn't escape. Li Qie watched them run around like dogs that had lost their masters. After a while, he sneered. You aren't the only ones who know how to seal space. Space sealing was another technique from the space scripture, part of the space control chapters. It was prohibitively difficult for cultivators to destroy this containment once trapped inside. The 2 fleeing figures finally stopped. They understood that the only way to escape from this space was to kill Li Qie. People finally got a good look at them at this time. They were 2 old men. One was short but had a huge shield on his back. The other was a burly fellow with a spear and a sharp glare. Someone exclaimed after clearly seeing the 2. These are 2 of the 5 generals of the Lithodity Overlord, the Turtle and Spear Generals. Lu Ruyan and Zhuo Jianshi weren't surprised at all, for this was within their expectations. The crowd glanced at each other after this revelation. Lithodity had 5 generals: Turtle, Spear, Net, Hook, and Dagger. Rumor has it that these 5 generals had a formidable killing technique. Many experts much stronger than them had actually fallen to their hands. They had many illustrious exploits under the Overlord. Turtle and Spear appearing together at this place had answered the question of who the mastermind behind the whole thing was to many. What made others curious was how this feud came to be between Li Qie and the Overlord. Li Qie smiled and indifferently said, "So it is the Overlord's people. Looks like he couldn't swallow the anger from the other day." In fact, it wasn't strange for the Overlord to want to kill Li Qie. He was a ruthless man who loved challenges. Taking Li Qie's head was, without a doubt, a great challenge. Turtle and Spear put on dignified expressions, and Turtle lowered his tone. "This has nothing to do with our master. We did this of our own volition." "Loyal enough." Li Qie smiled. "Unfortunately, you 2 won't be able to live any longer to show your loyalty to your master. Kill him." The 2 generals didn't waste any more words. It was time to fight to the death. Spear roared and rushed forward alongside Turtle. Bang! Turtle's gigantic shield ferociously slammed into Li Qie like a mountain. Explosions sounded even before the impact. Li Qie smiled and unleashed a finger strike through the sky, aiming for the shield. Boom! It didn't matter how powerful or heavy the shield was, it couldn't handle Li Qie's attack. Turtle staggered backward after this exchange. Pluff! While Turtle lost the first move, Spear suddenly appeared right behind Li Chia like a poisonous serpent with his spear mercilessly aiming for Li Chia's ribs. He chose the perfect time to attack in order to deliver a fatal blow. Li Chia didn't bat an eye at the approaching spear. He flicked his finger, issuing a clanging noise and diverting the spear tip. Next, he attacked again, aiming straight for Spear's forehead. Spear was startled and quickly pulled his weapon back to defend. Meanwhile, Turtle, who was repelled by just one finger, was aghast after looking at his shield. He was an all-shield turtle, a very rare sea demon. His shield was part of his carapace and was unbelievable hard. It was countless times tougher than an ordinary divine metal. But now, there were cracks on it because of Li Chia's finger. Just how terrifying was the power contained in that strike? However, since Li Chia was attacking Spear, Turtle didn't have time to think too much and instantly rejoined the fray. Clank! Even though Spear was using his weapon for protection, it still couldn't stop the approaching finger. The spear cracked while Li Chia's finger continued straight for his forehead. While watching Spear accept death, Turtle arrived just in time. Boom! His shield blocked Li Chia's attack once more to save Spear. However, it was completely penetrated this time. Suddenly, a net appeared out of nowhere above Li Chia's head. It was as thin as fine silk, so it was hard for people to see. It looked just like a layer of mist floating over his head. It moved at an incomparable speed to surround and trap Li Chia completely. Many people's hearts skipped a beat after seeing this new development. In this split second, the net finally engulfed Li Chia in a firm manner as another old man appeared in the sky. A spectator recognized him right away and shouted, "The Net General!" This was another general under the Lithodity Overlord. Net heaved a sigh of relief after seeing that his net had a firm grasp on Li Chia. He laughed raucously and said, "Even if your techniques were better, you still won't be able to escape my heavenly net." But his smile froze before he could finish. The net was indeed solid, but the one under it wasn't Li Chia, it was the Turtle and Spear generals. As for Li Chia, he was standing where these two generals were earlier. The net general couldn't believe his eyes. His ambush had never failed before, yet he missed his mark this time. Li Chia wasn't trapped. His allies had inexplicably fallen under it instead. This was displaced space under the spatial control branch. It allowed Li Chia to swap positions with his enemies, which was why the other two generals were trapped instead. The two shocked generals shouted in unison, "Let go of us!" During all of the commotion, a black rope slithered towards Li Chia like a spirit serpent and wrapped around him. It was simply too fast, making it seem as if it had been waiting for Li Chia this whole time. The moment he stood still, it immediately coiled around him. Moreover, it coiled around him crazily as if aiming to strangle him. Another old man appeared out of nowhere while holding the other end of the rope. Someone exclaimed, "The Hook General!" Whoosh! A light flashed while the rope held Li Chia tightly. This glint aimed for his throat in a ruthless manner in order to push him towards his death. Pluff! The incomparably sharp dagger pierced his throat. Blood sputtered under this fatal stab. "Haha, even if you were stronger, you can't escape death in the face of our joint offense." A gloomy voice sounded as the fifth old man appeared. He was the Dagger General, a master at ambush and assassination. He didn't have much time to think before shield, net, and spear standing in front of him were aghast. They all shouted at the same time, "No!" Chapter 13:13. Space-shifting Dagger's smile froze after hearing the group shout. He quickly looked over and found that it was Hook whose neck he pierced, not Li Chia. Blood spurted from his neck as his eyes went wide. He tried to speak, but people could only hear ugh, ugh, ugh coming out of his mouth. Dagger was stricken with shock and cried, "No!" He didn't expect to have killed his own brother in this manner. Meanwhile, Li Chia was standing where Hook previously was. Even though he was still tied up, he was completely unharmed and stood there calmly. It was displaced space again. He swapped positions with Hook right when the dagger swung by. Hook died without even knowing why. Li Chia leisurely smiled. "It seems like you really are getting old with worsening eyesight, treating your ally as an enemy." The other four's expressions turned unsightly. Their ambush didn't harm Li Chia at all and instead resulted in their own brother dying. A sea demon murmured after seeing this scene, "All 5 generals of the Overlord are here." In fact, the 5 were all on the ship earlier, but after being exposed, shield and spear purposely came out to bait Li Qie while the other three hid and waited for the right opportunity. The five had always worked together regardless of whether they faced a single enemy or hundreds. Their teamwork and techniques were incredible, ranging from ambushes, assassination arts, and traps. Because of this, many people stronger than them had fallen to their hands. This time, even though their location was exposed, they were still confident and wanted to use their great teamwork to kill Li Qie. However, they didn't expect for the first victim to be their own brother, Hook. Li Qie smiled at them and asked while still tied up, "Are you done yet?" The four generals looked at each other. They gathered closer together as Dagger gritted his teeth and said, "Little animal, it'll be you or us today." Li Qie only chuckled in response. "Wrong, it will be the four of you dying unwilling deaths." The four adjusted their positions while Li Qie leisurely watched them set up their new formation. After the four were done, this new formation surrounded Li Qie perfectly. No matter the angle, their attack wouldn't harm their own people. At the same time, they were able to cut off Li Qie's movements while keeping him within the range of their attacks. "You four indeed understand how to work together." Li Qie gave an indifferent smile and said, "Unfortunately, your cultivations are too weak. If you all had the power of a god king on top of this teamwork, you could do whatever you want in heaven's spirit. You can kill ordinary cultivators with your strength, but in my eyes, the four of you are not much different from ants." "Slay!" The four of them responded with a shout. In the blink of an eye, they seemed to have a mental connection and attacked at the same time from completely different angles. Dagger aimed for Li Qie's neck, Net threw a poisonous net made out of sand at his back. Shield attacked with the power of a mountain in order to shatter Li Qie's head. Spear's weapon was as overbearing as fire. He unleashed a barrage of thrusts at Li Qie's legs. In the face of these attacks from all directions, Li Qie was still as calm as ever despite being tied up by the black rope. Boom! Time stopped in this sealed space, making the scene seem like a picture. An unbelievable spectacle unfolded before everyone. Dagger slashed Shield's throat while Shield shattered Spear's skull. Meanwhile, Spear pierced Net's chest and Net's sharp mesh cut through Dagger's body. Their eyes were opened wide in astonishment. They had calculated their positions very carefully, so there was no chance of hurting their own brothers like earlier. Even if Li Qie switched his position with one of them, accidental injuries still shouldn't have happened. However, Li Qie stood still this time. He had not shifted, it was the rest of them. They ended up killing each other, resulting in this scene. Bang! 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 Their bodies fell down one by one. These were indignant deaths since not even in their dreams would they have imagined that they would fall at the hands of their own brothers. Just like Li Qie said earlier, they would be the ones to die unwilling deaths. What the hell is that technique? Many people gasped after seeing this. Even an expert at the sect master level paled with fear. This sect master senior, a virtuous paragon, explained, "This is a spatial technique. Li Qie cultivates some kind of space technique, allowing him to arbitrarily control the movements of space." The paragon was right. It wasn't displaced space this time but rather space shifting. In that split moment, he shifted space so that they would kill each other. Just like that, Turtle's throat was moved in front of Dagger's attack while Spear's skull was shattered by Shield. He can do it on a whim? The sect master was alarmed. Doesn't that mean Li Qie can teleport people wherever he wishes? The paragon mused for a bit before answering with uncertainty. That depends on their cultivation. At a certain level, Li Qie shouldn't be able to shift his enemy through space, or maybe the effect would be greatly reduced. In fact, he was right. Just as Li Qie had stated earlier, the cultivation of the generals was too weak. If they were god kings, it wouldn't be easy for Li Qie to move them. And even if he could, it would be very limited. But with their strength, they couldn't protect their own space. It was very easy for Li Qie to shift their spatial locations. Sigh, why must such good brothers kill each other? Li Qie laughed. The black rope around him finally loosened and slipped off. This rope was not a threat to him at all. He was only playing with the generals to let them think victory was at hand. He floated in the sky and swept through the area. There was no other ambush. The enemy had exhausted their means. Trying to kill me with such pathetic means? How disappointing. I was expecting a much better trap. Li Qie leisurely smiled while shaking his head before returning to Ruyan's ship. Many were temporarily speechless after hearing this. In fact, they could see that the ambush from the five generals was quite formidable. The blazing serum Traiants and ice spirit sea demons initiated the attack and were immediately followed by a monster like the Kraken. Even a god monarch would find it difficult to evade death. However, Lichia came out unscathed while all the generals died pitifully. Fierce is too terrifying. He is definitely not weaker than the Sea Shield Prince or Seven Martial Goddess. A person shuddered while watching the ship from the Evil Devourer school leave. He has a pretty good chance of becoming the immortal emperor of our generation. An older sea demon had to admit that Lichia was mighty. Heh, so what? Even if he was stronger, he can't become the emperor. A charming spirit sneered. With Meng Zhentian around, he is only an ant unless he can become an emperor candidate in the next 2 years. Otherwise, Meng Zhentian will crush him to death. Even those who didn't like the statement couldn't refute due to the current consensus of Meng Zhentian's success. Competing for the heaven's will against him was courting death. Even for the greatest of geniuses. Fortunately, the Sea Shield Prince and Seven Martial Goddess are sea demons. They don't need to fight for the heaven's will. Some sea demons were thankful for this. If they didn't need the heaven's will, it meant that they didn't have to become Meng Zhentian's enemies. Chapter 13-14. Seven Martial Pavilion. The ship began to depart with Lichia back inside. He sat down and closed his eyes to relax. What happened earlier was just a mere warm-up for him. No, it couldn't even be considered a warm-up. After his training, Lichia had mastered space control from the scripture to a peerless level. While looking at Lichia, Xueqi said, "The Lithodity Overlord really went all out." The two of them understood the feud between Lichia and the Overlord. The truth was that it was only a little resentment and not an irreconcilable feud. The problem was that Lichia didn't give him any respect. But now, this became an unforgivable feud. He paid a great price for Lichia's life and wouldn't give up until the deed was done. That Overlord always likes to think of himself as a ferocious man who enjoys the hunt and won't give up until the prey is dead. Ruyan chuckled. The bounty must have been exorbitant or else someone like Sima Yujian wouldn't have come. He's just another ant. After I'm finished with my business, I'll destroy their regal valley. That was the only statement Lichia made about the Overlord. He didn't even have enough interest to go and kill him right now. Zhenshi and Ruyan glanced at each other. The regal valley was a sea god's lineage, yet Lichia made it sound as if it was only a minor sect. However, they didn't feel that his words were outrageous. Since he said so, the regal valley was doomed to extinction. After all the commotion, the ladies thought that the trip to the Bone Sea would be peaceful again. Alas, they didn't make it too far before a disciple came in with a message. An elder from the Seven Martial Pavilion wishes to meet young noble Li. Oh, the pavilion. Zhenshi's eyes became serious. Ruyan smiled in response. It looks like even a behemoth like the pavilion can't sit still. Regardless of their purpose for coming today, it shows that you have entered their sight. The pavilion was the most powerful behemoth in the Dragon Demon Sea. It sat at the apex of all sea demons, a place full of masters. It once produced 3 invincible sea gods. There was a phrase at the Dragon Demon Sea: if the Roaring Conch could order all sea demons in the world, then the Seven Martial Pavilion could reign supreme in the Dragon Demon Sea. Someone in Heaven's Spirit once speculated that the unfathomable pavilion was not weaker than any lineage with 3 immortal emperors. Let him in. Lichia gently waved his sleeve with a smile. A moment later, an old man was led inside by the disciple. He wore a gray robe and a veiled hat. His blood energy was hidden, true to his low-key appearance. He saw the trio and bowed. "I am the 3rd elder of the Seven Martial Pavilion. Nice to meet you, young noble Li, Schoolmaster Zhua, and Schoolmaster Liu. Thank you for visiting despite the long journey." Ruyan, as the host, gracefully responded with a charming smile. Both the pavilion and the 3 schools were behemoths, so they have dealt with each other before. As schoolmasters, the girls naturally recognized this elder. The elder didn't waste time after the greetings. He brought out a wooden box with both hands and handed it over to Lichia. "Young noble Li, this is our first meeting. Here is a token of goodwill from our pavilion. Please accept." Lichia casually placed it on the table before opening it. A blue light shot out. It was very pure without the slightest flaw, as if many stars were stored inside. The box was filled with gems. Every single one of them was blue, as if each one stored an ocean. Heart of the sea. It looks like your pavilion is being very cordial this time. Ruyan chuckled after seeing the contents inside. A heart of the sea was an exceedingly rare gem in Heaven's spirit. They were precious and could be used like refined jades. Each one could be traded for a large amount of jades. A box full of these gems was a very extravagant showing. Anyone else would be quite impressed, but not Li Qie. He didn't give the gems a second glance before looking at the third elder with a smile. It looks like your pavilion has something to ask of me. Allow me to speculate. If I'm not mistaken, you want to invite me to replenish your ancestor's life. Li Qie smiled after stating this conclusion. How did you know, young noble? The third elder was taken aback after hearing this. If this wasn't a matter discussed only by the highest echelons of the pavilion, he would have thought that some disciples had leaked it. Just a guess. Li Qie leisurely explained. Your pavilion wouldn't be this enthusiastic unless you needed my help. Your sect has no lack of treasures and merit laws, so that's out of the question. As for recruitment, this probability isn't high either. You don't lack talents. Moreover, I have massacred billions of sea demons, so recruiting me would be harmful to the pavilion's reputation. He concluded. Ultimately, the only thing I have that is worthy of your pavilion's attention is my supreme alchemy. I replenished the peacock tree's life, so your pavilion is tempted as well. Incredible! The elder praised. Your mind is very meticulous, worthy of admiration. He bowed his head. There was no need to hide anything after all that had been said, so he continued. It is just as you have said, our pavilion wants to invite you to perform your peerless alchemy to prolong our ancestor's life. As for the payment, you just need to say the word, everything is negotiable. Ruyan and Jianshi didn't interject. They knew Li Qie was capable of this task, but he wouldn't do so very easily. Li Qie gently shook his head. I'm not interested. I don't want to replenish anyone's life right now. Even if someone is willing to pay handsomely, I still won't do it. The elder quickly added, but young noble, you have done it for the peacock tree. Li Qie laughed in response. I didn't do so for the payment or because I owed the tree something, I did it because it has been protecting the human race. That alone is enough. The elder busily pressed on. Everything is on the table if you can renew our ancestor's life. Li Qie replied with a grin. I don't need anything. I do not lack treasures or wealth. Since this is the case, why should I perform something as demanding as life replenishment? It is a heaven-defying matter. Even though I don't really care about the villainous heaven's opinion, your payment isn't worth my time. Young noble, you should reconsider. The elder still didn't give up. He handed Li Qie a list and said, as long as you are willing to try, it doesn't matter if you are successful or not, we will pay you well. If successful, we can let you pick a sea god's weapon and merit law. Both the girls were moved after hearing this. These items were very precious, even for a sea god's lineage. The pavilion had 3 sea gods, so they possessed more than just a few weapons and merit laws. However, these items were still prized artifacts for their lineage. None of these great powers would ever use items of this level for trade unless there was no other choice. Who put the prodigal son in charge? Now that's more interesting. Li Qie smiled after the elder revealed his cards. Among your ancestors, few are worthy of your lineage offering this much in exchange for life replenishment. Ancestors were indeed valuable, but not to the level of trading ancestral weapons and merit laws for their lives. The elder hastily said, as long as young noble Li is willing, everything is negotiable. Actually, there is only one person who is worthy of this high price. Li Qie smiled and continued. The person whose life you are trying to prolong must be old hallowed, correct? How do you know that? The third elder's expression drastically changed as he tumbled backward. Li Qie smirked in response. Just calculated it with my fingers, that's all. Outside of the old man that you all call the hallowed ancestor, no one else is worth a sea god's weapon and merit law. To do so for anyone else would be a waste, a form of disrespect towards the forefathers. Yes, the only exception is the hallowed ancestor. Chapter 13:15. Hallowed ancestor. Your hallowed ancestor is still alive? Ruyan and Jianshi were astonished as well. The elder awkwardly laughed. He knew he couldn't hide it anymore, so he said, his venerable is still alive, but he isn't interacting with the rest of the world. There was no doubt that their hallowed ancestor had been sealed this whole time in order to allow him to live until now. Li Qie faintly smiled and said, He won't live for much longer despite being sealed. 2 sea gods have helped him in this process, but in the end, one cannot escape death. The elder sighed at this comment. Unpleasant as it may be, it was the truth. Genscher was amazed. I have heard my elders talk about the hallowed ancestor before. He was the Tao protector of 2 generations of sea gods. The hallowed ancestor was the most powerful and oldest existence in the 7 martial pavilion. Even in the entire heaven spirit world, he was still one of the most supreme characters. When it came to the pavilion, many knew about the 7 great styles, the strongest techniques of the pavilion. They believed no one knew all 7, but this was far from the truth. Their 3 sea gods all understood the 7 styles. The reason why their main successor, the 7 sea goddess, was so famous was because she also knew the 7 styles. Rumor has it that she was the only one who could claim this honor in the pavilion at this moment. The truth was that there was another person outside of the goddess, and he was much more powerful and terrorizing compared to her. It was the hallowed ancestor. I heard your ancestor once challenged an immortal emperor with his 7 styles. Ruyan became curious. Li Qie found the topic amusing, so he answered before the elder could. That he did. After understanding the 7 styles, he believed he was invincible and challenged immortal Emperor Yan Shi. At that time, the young emperor didn't have the heavens will just yet, but it still ended in the ancestor's defeat. Despite losing, he could still hold his head high. Being only several hundred years older than the emperor, he had yet to reach his peak. The elder stared at him earnestly. Young noble Li, what do you think now? Our pavilion sincerely wants to work with you. If you still think that these conditions are not suitable, you can state your own demands. The elder put on a pitiful posture, letting Li Qie do whatever he wanted. This was to say that Li Qie could name whatever price he wanted. It was the pavilion displaying their sincerity in this deal for Li Qie to see. Same as before, I'm not interested. Li Qie was unmoved and refused with a grin. This attitude from Li Qie was quite a headache for the elder. Anyone else would have already agreed to such favorable conditions, but Li Qie was completely indifferent. The elder composed himself once more and continued. Young noble Li, you can pick any treasure from our pavilion as long as the life renewal is successful. Moreover, the hallowed ancestor will be your Tao protector and shield as you become the immortal emperor. The 2 girls were moved this time. The immortal throne was an incomparable temptation that no one could resist. Claiming that he would protect a human for the throne was a bold and seemingly blustering statement. However, it was different for the hallowed ancestor. He had protected 2 sea gods before, so his strength was beyond doubt. Furthermore, he was experienced in this endeavor. With his protection, as long as the genius was strong enough, the possibility of them becoming immortal emperor was quite high. Li Qie only chuckled at this new condition. Genscher, on the other hand, made a suggestion. Elder, you might as well have your 7 sea goddess follow young noble. It would be a formidable alliance. Ruyan chimed in with a smile. That's not a bad idea, marrying the goddess to young noble. The descendant of an immortal emperor and a sea goddess will have matchless talents. Plus, you will become family, so it would be a matter of course for young noble to renew your ancestor's life. The elder didn't respond right away. He took his time musing this idea. It really wasn't a bad proposal at all. A match between an immortal emperor and a sea goddess was perfect. More importantly, Li Qie had an imperial bloodline. If he were to become an immortal emperor, this bloodline would become even more precious. Their offspring would bring a golden age to the pavilion, and the bloodline of their descendants would undergo an unprecedented evolution. Chapter 13:16. The transaction. The elder grew indecisive under the egging of the 2 girls. He glanced at Li Qie several times in the meantime while pondering. Eventually he spoke. Schoolmasters, I don't have the authority to make a decision regarding your proposal, but I can talk to the ancestors about it once I return. In fact, this suggestion had left his heart thumping fast. Judging by Li Qie's performance, he really did have the aptitude to become an immortal emperor. However, Meng Zhentian's current prestige was too strong. However, if their hallowed ancestor were to become Li Qie's Tao protector and help him survive the difficult parts, he really would have a chance to compete against Meng Zhentian. Meng Zhentian's strength was undeniable, but it was not as if the younger generation couldn't surpass him. What they lacked was time. If a true overlord was willing to stop Meng Zhentian to buy time for the youths, then the heavens will might have a different master. Moreover, the marriage between an immortal emperor and a sea goddess was too promising to be left out. The truth was that the pavilion had thought about working together with Meng Zhentian as well. The problem was that he was too powerful. The person in charge of the alliance and the overarching situation would be Meng Zhentian, not the pavilion. At that time, there was a chance of them giving away a bride yet still losing an army on top of it. Well, regardless of the situation, we can't trade our 7 styles. The elder shook his head. If that's the case, then I can only say that this is quite regrettable. Li Qie waved his sleeve and said, "The problem is not on my end but yours." He continued on with a smile. "If I refuse to save your ancestor, you can say that I am cruel and emotionless. That's a reasonable statement to make. However, the truth is that I have agreed. It is your side that won't accept. Thus, you can't blame me for what happens. It's your problem now." The elder found himself stuck at an impasse and didn't know what to say. "You can reconsider, I still have some time. Don't keep me waiting though. I'll be leaving Heaven's Spirit eventually." Li Qie smiled. The helpless third elder had to bid farewell to Li Qie. "I'll go back and discuss your demand with the ancestors." With that, he reluctantly left. There was nothing else to negotiate since the 7 styles was absolutely not up for trade. After he left, Li Qie looked at the 2 girls and said, "Pretty grand scheme the 2 of you had earlier." Zhenshi smiled awkwardly with her head hanging low like a young wife. Ruyan, on the other hand, was still very playful. "It is mutually beneficial. If the martial goddess can ascend and you become the immortal emperor, your marriage would be a match made in heaven." She grew even bolder and charmingly smiled. "Young noble, you have been allied with our 3 schools for generations. If you become an emperor with a sea goddess as your imperial queen, our schools can bask in your glory as well, right?" Li Qie chuckled after hearing this. He didn't mind their attempt at all. Of course, they had their own opinions about trying to match Li Qie with the 7 sea goddess. Zhenshi eventually lifted her head and asked, "Young noble, do you really want to replenish the hallowed ancestor's life?" "Oh. It looks like the 2 of you think very highly of the 7 sea goddess. Do you really want to see her ascend?" Li Qie batted his eyes and smiled. "I just want to help you marry a sea goddess." Ruyan winked back with a charming smile. "We have met the Sea Shield Prince and 7 sea goddess before." Unlike Ruyan, who was rather sly, Zhenshi was frank and sincere. "I would rather have the 7 sea goddess as the victor. We don't have an optimistic view on the Sea Shield Prince, at least with respect to Heaven's Spirit and our Void Imperfection schools." Chapter 13:17. Lithodity Overlord's second provocation. Zhenshi said in a serious manner, "We don't think highly of the prince not because of his talents, but rather his ambition for expansion." Her gentle eyes looked over at Li Qie as she revealed her thoughts. Sea gods and immortal emperors are different. Even if an emperor comes from Heaven's Spirit, they won't necessarily stay here. But a sea god will always return. Sea gods will rise and fall here. The ambition of an emperor is the entire 9 worlds, while a sea god's is limited to Heaven's Spirit. The other locations, to them, are only fleeting visits. If the prince were to become the next sea god, his impact would be much greater than the 7 sea goddess. Many charming spirits would prefer to see her win. To be honest, we have a good personal relationship with the 7 sea goddess. Ruyan chuckled and winked at Li Qie like a seductive temptress. Her charm sunk straight into the heart as she smiled. "For both personal and business reasons, we want to see a sea goddess in the future." After hearing this, Li Qie smiled in response. She is so young yet well versed in the 7 styles. This means that her chance of success is quite high. However, that's the business of herself and the pavilion. It has nothing to do with me. They just need to give me the 7 styles and I'll replenish the hallowed ancestor's life. Zhenshi emotionally sighed. The 7 styles. She knew that such a trade was simply impossible. The pavilion would never trade the 7 styles to anyone. "I heard the 7 styles actually came from the Tao scripture." Ruyan became quite curious and smiled. "Young noble, what do you think?" "You seductress, don't try to pry it from me." Li Qie smiled then glared at her. "I don't have an opinion on this matter. But you really want the 7 styles. I actually thought that you were trying to collect parts of the Tao scripture." Ruyan wasn't afraid of Li Qie. "Tao scripture, eh?" Li Qie replied with great amusement. "Many things aren't just legends, but yes, the 7 styles are indeed very tempting." Ruyan softly asked, Must you have the 7 styles? Little girl, you are mistaken. If I was determined to get it, it would be in my hands right now. For me, it is only a little interesting, not to the point where I must have it. The 2 girls didn't comment further. They understood that the 7 styles had always been a highly coveted item for millions of years. People's mouths would start to water whenever they thought about it. After Li Qie killed the 5 generals, many thought that the Lithodity overlord would avoid him. After all, Li Qie was basking in the spotlight on top of being a very ferocious genius that was always ready to massacre an entire clan or sect. However, the overlord unexpectedly did not avoid Li Qie at all. On the other hand, he held a public feast while maintaining a bright demeanor. He invited many experts and young geniuses to this party. Moreover, it was held at the War Cliff, not far away from the Bone Sea. To remember and celebrate the glory and accolades of the ancestors after coming here, the overlord gave this reason for the celebration. This public feast left everyone with different interpretations and opinions. Someone who understood him explained, Li Qie is a monster, but the same is true for the overlord. He views Li Qie as prey and won't give up until the hunt is over. This overlord likes a challenge and a certain amount of risk in his conquest. He basks in success after making a trophy out of his victims. In recent years, he has killed many characters stronger than Li Qie, and now Li Qie's head is his new target. Even if he has to throw away everything, he will not give up. After hearing this news, a sect master slowly said, "The War Cliff is very close to the Bone Sea. I think Li Qie's group has to go through it first." Is he really picking the War Cliff as the location for the feast just out of remembrance and to honor the ancestors? I think he is trying to lure Li Qie in. A sea demon was certain. People always say that this overlord is a huge deviant. If he could cut off Li Qie's head in front of everyone, it might be the most pleasurable thing in his life. It would be one of his biggest achievements for sure. He's quite brave, but does he have the strength to kill Li Qie? Plus, Li Qie might not even go to the War Cliff. Some were full of curiosity. Of course, some felt distressed as well, such as the ones that were invited by the overlord to this celebration. A few of them didn't want to get into this kind of trouble. In their eyes, both Li Qie and the overlord were too ruthless, they wanted no part in this. However, if they didn't accept the invitation, the overlord might hold a grudge against them. Once they were there, it would be good if the overlord could kill Li Qie. However, if he couldn't and Li Qie massacred everyone there in anger, it would be quite a miserable fate for them. Who knows who will win? The blatant provocation made people suddenly smell the stench of blood. The overlord is someone who never conducts himself in a righteous manner. He has no scruples about the methods he deploys. He is not an ordinary expert or genius. Those people require face and their conduct revolves around it, but not the overlord. I'm sure he has ways of killing Li Qie even if he is weaker. He has never failed before, so he must have something up his sleeves before deciding to make such a grandiose move. A heavenly king of the sea demon race analyzed the situation. What a ruthless man. Some actually felt admiration for him. It was common knowledge that the overlord was unlikely to become the next sea god. His shortcomings were very obvious compared to the Sea Shield Prince and 7 Sea Goddess. Of course, he had no ambition to become the next sea god either. He enjoyed the sensation of the hunt and the thrill of killing even more. Because of this, he had a bad reputation for being a deviant in the Dragon Demon Sea. Li Qie also received this news. Ruyan told Li Qie right away after hearing about it. That Lithodity overlord is holding a banquet at the War Cliff. A very brave man. Li Qie smiled. Still daring to show his face in this situation, what exceptional courage. He might be declaring war on you, young noble. Jianshi slightly frowned. He must have prepared more traps at the War Cliff and is waiting for you to jump in. Not might, he is for sure. Ruyan chuckled. He knows that he has no chance of becoming a sea god, so he is using these gimmicks to raise his own prestige. Instead of calling him a pervert, it is more apt to say he has an inferiority complex. If he was a truly ferocious character, he would be challenging the Sea Shield Prince's group and mercilessly force himself to become a sea god. Alas, he doesn't even have the courage to face the challenge head-on. How can people think of him as being ruthless? Knowing that it is impossible yet still choosing to do it, that is true ruthlessness to oneself. Such eloquence. Li Qie laughed right away. Reaching the throne and becoming a sea god indeed requires courage and ruthlessness. Doing the impossible. This has always been a driving force for cultivators along their endless road. I am elated to hear your praise. She gave a charming smile that pulled at the heartstrings. Are you going, young noble? Gensher was much more dignified and graceful compared to the demoness. Of course, why wouldn't I? Lichia happily answered. He is someone who is certain of victory, the type I like to crush the most. I will trample on his confidence and make him drown in despair before sending him to his miserable end. A descent from joy to nothingness. Young noble, you are the real pervert here. Ruyan shot out a seductive glance capable of stealing away souls. Lichia laughed and commanded. Go to the war cliff. The boat of the evil devourer school headed straight for the cliff. This didn't go unnoticed. The crowd knew that this was the prelude to the play. Two monsters. One who is completely undeterred by danger while the other must have a successful hunt. A sea demon commented. This will be a splendid show. The result is uncertain, so it will certainly be exciting. I won't miss this for anything. Some followed right after the boat, anxious to watch the fun. Chapter 13:18. Swift Tao Celestial God. The Warcliff was relatively close to the Bone Sea. Fierce waves slammed against the cliff in a relentless manner. Cliffs emerged one after another from the sea. Each of them had different cracks and varying amounts of damage. Some had been severed in two while others were in shambles, and even more were pierced through completely while some were pried open. Today, the cold seawater didn't give these cliffs any breaks, as if they were recalling the terrifying war of past. Rumor has it that this place used to be a complete mountain with lush vegetation. Even though it wasn't considered a continent, it was the home for many cultivators. However, a war occurred and ravaged this land. The remnants of this fierce battle rendered this land uninhabitable. The main character of this war back then was the Regal Valley's progenitor, the Lithodides sea god. After those war-torn days, he managed to establish his unshakable position. At the beginning of his generation, the Trident accepted the Blood Shark sovereign. Later on, it abandoned him for some unknown reasons and accepted Lithodides instead. Because of this, a new chapter was written for this existence. Of course, being accepted by the Trident didn't mean that they became a sea god right away. The user must train and experience tribulations. Only when they were truly standing at the peak and able to use the laws of sea gods would they be considered a real deity. Before grasping the laws of the sea, one wasn't considered a sea god even with the Trident. They were only candidates at best. In fact, these candidates had been forcibly replaced many times. This was how the second sea god of the Seven Martial Pavilion came to be. The tales told that in the beginning, the Trident didn't accept this particular successor of the pavilion. However, the pavilion was too heaven-defying and nurtured a successor with mighty power. He used supreme means to suppress the Trident while killing the current candidate. This candidate was formidable as well, especially when he had control of the Trident. Alas, he still wasn't a sea god at that point and couldn't exert the Trident's true power without the accompanying laws. In the end, the pavilion was able to subdue the Trident and kill the current candidate. At the same time, its successor created a supreme Grand Tao with his matchless momentum and pure bloodline. Ultimately, he was accepted by the Trident and proceeded to master the sea god laws to become an invincible sea god. This was the famous Deep Blue Sea God, the second of the Seven Martial Pavilion. There were 8 levels on this path. Tao Child, Tao Master, Tao Sovereign, Celestial Mortal, Celestial General, Celestial God, Emperor Reserve, and Emperor Candidate. When a cultivator was on this path, they must create a Grand Tao that belonged to themselves. At the Celestial Mortal level, their Grand Tao could begin to feel the power of the Heaven's will. At the Emperor Reserve level, their Grand Tao would be accepted by the Heaven's will. This was in preparation to obtain it in the future. At the Emperor Candidate level, the Great War for the Heaven's will would begin. It was easy to see how unfathomable he was to reach the Celestial God level at the age of 16. Of course, this was partly due to the merit laws from the Swift Tao sacred ground, but it shouldn't diminish the involvement of his peerless talents. The Lithodides overlord personally came out to greet him with great enthusiasm. He said with a smile while cupping his fists, "The arrival of the Celestial God is an honor for this lowly one as well as our regal valley." The Swift Tao God on his small boat nodded his head without standing up and slowly said, "I am passing by on my way to the Bone Sea. After receiving Brother Lithodides' invitation, I've decided to stay for a bit." The Overlord was much older than the Celestial God, but he didn't dare to posture in front of him. He busily received him with a beaming expression. That's the celestial god. Many people were relieved. Regardless of what happens next, the overlord wouldn't dare to act recklessly, and Lichia wouldn't attack the celestial god either. In fact, the celestial god was very respected, especially by the younger generation. They had high hopes for him. In the view of many people, he actually had a good chance of competing for the heaven's will against Meng Zhentian. Although they didn't know his current realm, they were aware that he was a celestial god at 16 years of age. Many speculated that it was likely for him to be at the Emperor Reserve level. Coupled with the unparalleled merit laws of the Swift Dao Sacred Ground, he could catch up to Meng Zhentian as long as he had another 3 to 5 years. Chapter 1319. Attending the banquet, the majority of the guests came to greet him. Both the young geniuses and older experts respectfully addressed him as Celestial God. He was the one granting them solace from this stressful event. No matter how much trouble the Overlord was about to bring, he wouldn't dare to go overboard. The Overlord prepared a platform close to the sea surface above the war cliff. However, after the Celestial God's arrival, not too many were sitting there. The Celestial God remained on his small boat and maintained a certain distance from the Overlord. Since he didn't sit down, the others didn't dare to take a seat either. They all stayed on their own boats. In fact, this was only an excuse. No one wanted to be close to the crazy Overlord. Who knows what he was about to do? Of course, the Overlord didn't care. He drank his wine in a carefree manner. This feast was only a means to an end. He commanded his disciples to serve the guests with wine and food while sitting alone on his platform. After several courses were served, he found that the time was about right. He stood up and raised his cup while looking at the guests. Today, it is our honor to be graced with everyone's presence. As a junior thinking about the supreme prestige of my ancestors, I find that I will never be able to achieve what they achieved in an entire lifetime. I salute everyone for celebrating their deeds. Remember, no matter the generation, the sea gods will always be protecting our sea demon race. The others stood up and raised their cups in response. Even though many were forced to attend, they had to give him some face in this situation. Only the celestial god didn't stand up. He simply sat there and saluted back. Finish your drinks, everyone. The Overlord enthusiastically shouted after finishing his fervent speech. The rest quickly downed their cups. They all wanted to be done with this feast as soon as possible. Of course, they were wondering why Lichia hadn't come yet. How can I not come for a drink as well when such a nice feast is taking place? A leisurely voice sounded right when everyone put down their cups. Fierce is here. Someone shouted but then busily covered their mouth. The crowd turned around and saw the boat from the Evil Devourer school stopping at the border of the war cliff. Lichia walked off the boat, accompanied by Lu Ruyan. The Overlord was not surprised to see Lichia. He was actually all smiles as he quickly walked up to greet them. The Evil Devourer schoolmaster is here too? Some people felt even more relieved after seeing Lu Ruyan. With her and the Swift Dao god present, nothing too crazy should happen. An old sea demon quietly voiced his disagreement. The sky will turn over if the Overlord doesn't go crazy. After becoming the Regal Valley Master, he even killed his master, a high elder of the sect, just because he desired his master's wife. His father, the old Valley Master, tried to stop him, but he killed his father as well. Rumors outside say that they died from illness, but this is something many in the valley know about. He's a madman. Just watch, he'll do something insane for sure. A disciple from the Regal Valley whispered with the lowest volume. Only his peers could hear him. Lichia's arrival prompted many guests to quietly move their ships back in preparation for the inevitable madness from the Overlord. Greetings, Brother Li and Schoolmaster Lu. This is indeed an honor. The Overlord personally greeted Lichia with great enthusiasm. Many people found his cheerful expression surprising. Everyone knew that his 5 generals were killed by Lichia. The Overlord naturally knew this as well, but he acted as if nothing had happened. What a strange man, ordinary people can't do this. Another quietly spoke while looking at the Overlord acting polite and respectful towards Lichia. After his 5 generals ambushed Lichia, everyone could guess that it was him who paid the sky-high bounty for Lichia's life. But now, he was acting as if they were old friends. It was a very disconcerting spectacle. He led Lichia and Lu Ruyan to the platform. Li Qie only smiled to this hospitality while sitting down. Many people were in awe to see Li Qie up there. As long as one wasn't too stupid, they would understand that this feast was not as simple as it seems. No one would want to sit up there, but Li Qie didn't give a damn and showed off his arrogance despite knowing that it was a trap. Just how bold and courageous was this? Even the swift Dao god stared at Li Qie in a profound manner. He also wanted to see what Li Qie would do to overturn the tide. Li Qie sat down and leisurely asked, "Lithodity Overlord, do you not know or are you pretending?" The Overlord was caught off guard after hearing this. "Brother Li, what are you talking about?" The guests watched this conversation with bated breaths. Li Qie smilingly explained, "Have you not heard? A few days ago, I killed 5 people known to be your generals. Are you not aware of this?" "Is that true?" The Overlord was in disbelief. "My generals were sent to patrol the frontier of the Regal Valley. They couldn't have possibly appeared here." Li Qie burst out in laughter at this point. "Is that so? Then me killing them is really a big coincidence. Well, I could have gotten the wrong people, but what does everyone else think? I don't know anything about this since I've been busy worshipping my ancestors for the last few days. I haven't inquired about the matters of the sect." Having said that, he shouted, "Attendant, what actually happened?" An old man walked out after hearing the loud question. He looked at the Overlord and then Li Qie, not knowing how to answer. The Overlord lowered his tone. "I've been offering incense and burning ceremonial papers in private recently. When I'm not in control, you have full authority. Tell me, what actually happened? Were the 5 generals killed?" The guests glanced at each other after hearing this play by the Overlord and thought that he was really too much. "My lord, well about this," the attendant stammered while looking at the Overlord. He couldn't form a coherent sentence. Fury sparked in the Overlord's eyes as he coldly uttered, "What happened? Tell me now." Under the erupting aura of the Overlord, this attendant quivered and suddenly kneeled on the ground. "My lord, this is because I was confused and foolish. I noticed that someone had put a high bounty for young noble Li's life on the black market. I suddenly got greedy while you were busy with the filial ceremonies. I used your seal to command the 5 generals to ambush young noble Li. My lord, please spare my life. I was only momentarily blinded by greed. Please spare me." He slammed his head on the ground while begging for mercy. Many of the guests sneered at this scene. The Overlord was only finding a scapegoat. Who would actually believe this performance? "You fool!" The Overlord's eyes lit up with a frightening brilliance. "Sending false orders is an unforgivable sin." Having said that, he reached for the attendant. "My lord, spare." This attendant couldn't finish his sentence before the Overlord twisted his neck off, letting blood spurt everywhere. He died with his eyes wide open since it was an indignant death. This wasn't how things were supposed to go down. The Overlord put the skull into a wooden box and handed it to Li Qie. "Brother Li, I have offed his head. I hate deceivers the most." Some sneered after seeing this. A few guests felt disdain towards this act, but no one said anything. After all, the Overlord killed his own people and it was none of their business. "Is that so?" Li Qie only smiled. The Overlord lifted the lower section of his robe and kneeled on the ground. He spoke in a serious manner. "Brother Li, you are a hero in the contemporary. I have always admired you and would like to view you as a brother. Even though I am not the culprit, I am still responsible for being too lax with my subordinates. Here, I kneel before you to apologize." People were stunned by this act. No one knew why he was resorting to this method. Keep in mind that he was the sect master of a sea god's lineage. Someone of his prestigious status would never kneel so easily before people. For these sect masters, they would rather die before kneeling and admitting their mistakes. But now the Overlord was prostrating. How could people not be dumbfounded? Chapter 13:20. The Overlord scheme. People were looking silly due to this unbelievable spectacle. An Overlord of a region kneeled so easily. Others would rather have their legs cut off before kneeling, but not the Overlord. Everyone wanted to see how Li Qie would deal with this. "Really now?" Li Qie only smiled in response. "I know Brother Li won't trust me." The Overlord sincerely responded. "People say that a man has gold under his knees. Even though I didn't give the order, it is true that I'm still at fault, so I am kneeling to apologize. However, this might not appease you completely, so I'll sever one hand to show my sincerity." Whoosh! The Overlord instantly tore off his left arm. Blood sprayed everywhere as the Overlord placed his severed hand on the table. The Overlord didn't even bat an eye as he earnestly asked, "Has your anger subsided, brotherly?" This actually shocked the crowd. They stared at the Overlord in astonishment. Even though cultivators could recreate their bodies when they reached a particular cultivation, the process was costly and required the use of longevity blood. Thus, the stronger a cultivator, the more they cherished their own body. What's more was that for a master, losing one's arm was extremely humiliating. If an enemy were to cut off their arm, it would be an irreconcilable feud. A few started to waver before this submissive display. Could it be that the whole thing had nothing to do with the Overlord and the culprit was just his attendant who wanted the bounty? Those who had a better understanding of him snorted instead. They knew just how devious the Overlord was, so it wasn't so simple to deceive them. Xueqi smiled after seeing the severed arm. "So you really don't know?" The Overlord swore, "If I knew about it, it would have never happened. I admire you like the endless sea, so how could I do such a heartless thing? If I told half a lie, then let the heavens send down its thunder." Xueqi kept on smiling after hearing the vow. Ruyan's expression was hidden behind her veil so no one could see it. However, a happy spark flashed in her eyes. The Overlord raised his voice. "If Brotherly still doesn't believe me and think that I am the mastermind behind all of this, then just have my head to get rid of your anger and enmity. If Brotherly could discard this hatred, then my death would be worth it." Having said that, he stretched out his neck so that Xueqi could wring it off. Even more people were persuaded by this display and began to believe his words. The skeptical crowd simply chuckled without commenting. Eventually, Xueqi happily said, "Since you have gone this far, I will believe that this wasn't carried out by you. Forget about it." The Overlord hastily stated, "Brother Li, you are a magnanimous and benevolent man for which I am grateful to the point of tears. No matter what, this was my fault for not properly disciplining my underlings. I'll bow my head again as an apology." After that, he got down to the ground again and bowed with his head, hitting the ground 3 times with force. At this point, some believed him and felt that both his words and actions were full of sincerity. Such flexibility and ruthlessness, this kind of person will always be successful. Among the guests, an older cultivator quietly voiced his praise with a sigh. A few saw that Xueqi had accepted the explanation and whispered, "Xueqi might be fierce, but he is still too inexperienced. Sooner or later, he'll suffer because of this." After everything was settled, the Overlord let the servants bring up his finest wine and poured a cup. "Spilling blood during this celebration must have ruined your vibe, Brother Li. I will drink 3 cups to apologize." Having said that, he drank 3 cups in quick succession. After the gesture, he poured some for Xueqi and Lu Ruyan before happily smiling. "A toast for Brother Li and Schoolmaster Lu as well as the wise sages of this world. I wish that you will be able to reach the peak and obtain the heaven's will in the future." Xueqi smiled and drank without commenting. Lu Ruyan also did the same. The Overlord filled their cups once more for another toast. "The entire banquet glows with your presence. Please have another cup, everyone." The slightly unwilling guests raised their cups as well. After several rounds from the Overlord, Ruyan said, "My tolerance isn't great, I'll be leaving first." But the moment she got up, she tumbled and fell back in her chair while shouting, My blood energy has been blocked." "What's wrong?" Xueqi busily came over to help her up, but the same thing happened when he tried to stand up. He blurted, "There's poison in the wine." Many guests were shocked after seeing the two and quickly channeled their blood energies. However, they found it to be unobstructed. They were relieved to find that their bodies were perfectly fine. "It was you." Xueqi slumped in his chair and pointed at the Overlord while being both frightened and angry. "Li, even if you are fierce, you will still have to drink my feet-washing water soon. So what if you are strong? Your boat has capsized." The Overlord smugly laughed. "Impossible, the wine was clearly fine. How were we poisoned?" Lu Ruyan was astounded. The Overlord was very pleased with himself and laughed. "Yes, the wine was fine. If I poisoned the wine, it would have been hard to hide it from you. So I only added a bit of a sinister dragon saliva. It will only make the wine taste even more delicious. This saliva isn't poisonous at all, but the two of you are sitting on a chair made out of shadow wood. When the fragrance of this wood is mixed with a sinister dragon's saliva, it will turn into a dangerous poison, devoiding cultivators of their blood energy and power. I'm sure you didn't expect this method at all. The overlord grew complacent as he guffawed. Saliva of a sinister dragon and shadow wood. People were surprised to hear this. A sinister dragon was a very powerful sea creature in heaven's spirit. Both its saliva and the shadow wood were very precious items. It must have cost a sky-high price for him to obtain both. Everything you said earlier was lies? You were the culprit. Li Qie kept on pointing at the overlord in amazement. Ha 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 ha, yes, I'm the mastermind behind everything. The overlord loudly laughed. That attendant was only a scapegoat. Just a bit of goading from me and someone as arrogant as you would come. So I prepared the bait. Geniuses like you think you're superior and smarter than others. I just needed to kneel and play my part. This might be humiliating for others, but I never valued that kind of reputation. The method doesn't matter as long as I can achieve my purpose. I simply wanted to make you two drop your guard. I didn't expect for it to work so quickly. Capturing the both of you right now will save me a lot of effort. He felt quite proud of his plan. Ruyan shouted in response. You dare to do this in front of everyone? This was met with a manic laughter from the overlord. So what? This is only dealing with a personal vendetta. Many cultivators cherish their reputation, but I don't care what others call me. A scoundrel? A madman? So be it. Even if the world knows that I have used a despicable method to kill the two of you, so what? They can keep on calling me shameless. Plus, if everyone knows that I am the one to torture Li Qie to death, it would be an even greater accomplishment. Yes, watch me kill my prey. It will only make the process even more satisfying. His eyes shot out an excited glint. Chapter 1321. Skeletal Legion. Many people looked around after hearing this. Cultivators trod a thin line between life and death on a daily basis. Among them were many bad people and villains. But once they reached a certain level, they would cherish their reputation, especially the experts with great status. They would be much more prideful. Even a devil king, once strong enough, would look down on using despicable means against his enemies. They preferred directly suppressing and slaughtering their enemies. Few cultivators would use poisons. It was much rarer than assassinations. But now, the Lithodity overlord employed such a despicable method in front of the world and even took pride in it. This astonished many of the spectators. They didn't expect for the play to develop like this since some actually believed his apology earlier. Those who understood him weren't surprised at all. They only snorted as they had seen him do abnormal things like this before. Ruyan warned in all seriousness. Don't forget that my school's disciples are right outside. The overlord laughed in response. Schoolmaster Lu, you have nothing to worry about. As long as you are in my hands, your disciples won't dare to do anything. Plus, I'll only be taking Li Qie's dog life. There's no need for us to become enemies. If you want, wait until I kill Li Qie, then I'll take you outside. Of course, if you refuse, it's not like I'm afraid of you. I have ways to deal with your disciples if they want to break in. He revealed a devious smile at this point. But you need to think about the consequences of opposing me. I have heard of your peerless charm before. If you don't listen, I will keep you captive and educate you to become my sex slave. At that time, you will be as obedient as a child and become my woman. The Void Imperfection 3 schools won't have anything to say then either. He laughed crazily with an evil glare. People took deep breaths after hearing this. One of them murmured, he is really a mad pervert, he's willing to do just about anything. Isn't this enough gloating? At this time, Li Qie, who was slumped in his chair, smiled. Heh, it is just beginning. Wait a bit, I'll make you wish for death. The overlord showed a cruel smile. I kind of hope someone could make me taste such despair. Unfortunately, I have yet to meet them. At the very least, an ant like you won't be able to. With that, Li Qie sat straight again. Lu Ruyan did the same and laughed. Your words from earlier are more than enough to justify my Void Imperfection 3 schools mobilizing to destroy your regal valley. But I believe someone else wants to take your dog life more than me. How can this be? The overlord's expression shifted after seeing the two sitting up straight. He quickly staggered backward. Ruyan smiled. You were playing in the mud in some remote corner while I dabbled in poisons. I stopped with such trickeries at the age of 7. Only a fool like you would boast about such lowly means. Li Qie simply chuckled. He cultivated the void imperfection physique, so it would be strange if this level of poison could affect him. The overlord's expression turned ugly as he asked. You two were just pretending? Li Qie slightly grinned. I was just playing along so that I can see your most complacent and smug moment before stomping you down to the ground and shattering your confidence. Your hope so that you can taste the sensation of despair and defeat. The situation reversed once more to the astonishment of the crowd. Many didn't expect for these two to be pretending as well. Only the swift Tao god calmly drank his wine without being surprised at all. The overlord suddenly flashed and disappeared. He emerged again on top of a cliff and laughed. Li, I also didn't think poison could take you down, but since you are here today, it's more than enough. Rumble. With that, water pillars sprouted around the platform. Each pillar had been refined and reinforced with terrifying flashing runes. The swift Tao god commanded. Retreat! His small boat rushed out of the war cliff like an arrow. The other guests did the same and observed from a distance. Fortunately for them, they understood just how devious the overlord was, so they were cautious. Otherwise, if they were to sit on the platform, they would have fallen into this trap as well. More splashes came about. The water pillars seemed to turn the area into an ancient battlefield, and the platform was the center with Li Qie and Lu Ruyan on top. An ancient battlefield. Li Qie watched the brilliance gushing from the platform. Of course, the overlord wasn't capable of creating such a war zone. This was something left behind by his ancestors. Li, my ancestors back then slaughtered millions in a single battle, establishing an eternal prestige. The two of you have been trapped in this ancient battlefield. Don't even dream about escaping. The overlord loudly laughed. The withdrawn guests darted their eyes around and secretly praised their good fortune. Someone even murmured, "It's good that the swift Tao god was here so that we didn't have to sit on the platform or else he would have trapped us all." Li Qie was too lazy to take another glance at the battlefield before responding. Your ancestors established an eternal prestige here because they were indeed capable characters. As for you, an ant is all you amount to. In fact, Li Qie didn't place this battlefield in his sight. It had been used by the Lithodides sea god. It was once powerful, but after the previous battle, its strength had greatly diminished due to the great damage it suffered. Keep on running your mouth while you still can. In just a moment, you'll wish you were dead. The overlord took out a conch-like item. Woo! He blew the conch. The sound echoed across the region. It was mighty with a majestic and murderous aura. A sea demon paragon recognized the conch and exclaimed, "That's the divine sea conch of the Lithodides sea god." Splash! 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 Something incredible happened. Skeletons started to climb out of the sea after hearing the conch. Their bodies exuded dazzling lights while holding rusted weapons. In the blink of an eye, formations came out alongside a murderous aura. Without a doubt, these skeletons were once part of a powerful legion when they were alive. What is that? People understood that this was an experienced legion right away and became quite frightened. After leaving the sea, this legion instantly surrounded the ancient battlefield. Not even a drop of water could get through. A conservative estimate was around 100,000. One could easily imagine how terrifying being sieged by them was. People uncontrollably shuddered while looking at the dazzling skeletons. They felt death looming over them as if they were trapped in a city of the dead. These are the members that died from the legion that followed the Lithodides sea god back then. A sea demon was startled. The overlord is using the conch left behind by his ancestors to awaken them. At this time, many understood the overlord's intentions. He wanted to wake the regiment that was buried here in order to trap Li Qie. This used to be a legion that fought against millions of sea demons and laid out an unshakable status for the sea god. Today, he used this ancestral conch to wake them up in order to kill Li Qie. This method was indeed ruthless enough. Li Qie glanced at the legion completely surrounding the battlefield and flatly said, "If your ancestors knew that they had such an unfilial descendant like you, they would definitely crawl out of the yellow spring to end you." The Lithodides sea god buried his legion here and laid down a great formation to protect their spirits so that they may rest here in peace, a worthy reward for their contribution to his hegemony. But today you made them come out. Your foolish actions shall make them forever restless. Li Qie mockingly smiled. Chapter 1322. Cancer Divine Formation. The Overlord responded with a crazed guffaw. The winner takes also save me the preaching. I am only using these trash. So long as I can kill you. So what if they will never find peace again? They are already dead, mere skeletons. They only exist to be used one last time. The spectators shuddered with chills after hearing this. They thought that his perversion was extraordinary. Woo! The Overlord blew the conch again. The skeletons began their attack under his manic laughter. Lee, it's time to die. These skeletons are impossible to kill. They'll torture you to death. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions came about while the Legion entered the battlefield. The entire place shook under the suppression of their powerful aura. It made people wonder if the battlefield could actually withstand their force once the fight broke out, or would it be torn asunder? Someone looked at the 100,000 attacking soldiers and murmured, "A dead legion. This Overlord is too merciless. He's going against his ancestors' will of letting these heroes rest in peace. I wonder if Li Chia can stop this army of the dead?" People watched in anticipation from a distance. In the face of this oppressive army, Ruyan chuckled and said, "It's time for me to play." "No, it's my turn." Li Chia smiled and stood before her. A gigantic death chapter emerged as he took one step up. It crazily expanded and drowned the entire battlefield and sea. It imprinted its mark at the bottom of the sea as well as the battlefield itself. Boom! The death seal was activated. A death energy gushed out like a tsunami, making it seem like the greatest of all calamities. It engulfed this world and seemed to be alive. Individual strands from this tsunami poured into these skeletal bodies. It didn't stop there. With a clunk, the strands successfully implanted themselves. Strands of laws the size of a hair emerged from the death chapter and instantly locked onto these skeletons. Next, the death chapter returned to Li Chia's back and began to rotate. The chapter turned bright as its laws controlled the life and death of countless creatures. All of them were in Li Chia's grasp. Many heard a buzz as soul flames suddenly ignited in the eye sockets of these skeletons. The lit-up soul flames were in the color of blood. After the emergence of the soul flames, the entire legion suddenly stopped. One could hear a massive sound as they all turned at the same time under Li Chia's control. They made a circle around him, turning him into the supreme ruler of a dark kingdom. What's going on? People were astounded with their eyes wide open. Impossible! The Overlord cried out after seeing that his skeletal legion wouldn't attack Li Chia. He regained his wits and blew the conch again. However, despite his offensive signal, the skeletons didn't move at all. The conch might have been left behind by the Lithotidi sea god as a commanding seal for this dead legion, but its power over the dead was far from being comparable to the death chapter from the death scripture. Li Chia had boundless death energy and great mastery over this particular chapter, allowing him to easily control this legion of the dead. "Do you know what I mean when I said they will never have peace?" Li Chia faintly smiled. "It means that because of you, they will become my puppets and lose the chance to enter the cycle of reincarnation." The Overlord was aghast. He didn't expect for Li Chia to have such a move. Is this an evil art? Many had this notion running in their minds. "Li, you are indeed capable, but my means are beyond your imagination." The Overlord regained his confidence and laughed once more. With that, he blew the conch to stir the waves. Splash! The seawater soared into the sky. Sea god runes appeared up above and moved around like blinding stars that illuminated the night. Zzz! A sharp cry resounded across the dragon-demon sea. All of the water in the sky turned into an incomparable array. This gigantic array emitted a primal aura, causing the spectators to tremble. It was as if a monster from the ancient era had awakened. At this moment, a monstrous crab appeared in the sky. Its body was made out of water and the runes of a sea god composed its skeleton. Its claws ranged for thousands of miles and could easily crush the earth. Damn, what the hell is that thing? Numerous spectators felt their legs quivering after seeing this giant crab. A royal lord shouted in horror. "It's the Cancer Divine Formation, the proudest masterpiece in the Lithotidi sea god's life." Even though they looked to be right in front of them, they were in fact quite far away, just like the main space and the separated space. Boom, boom, boom. The Divine Formation unleashed a strong barrage inside its tiny space. Its gigantic claws could shatter the sky vault. Even the main space began to shake. Everyone felt that if this continued, the gigantic formation would kill its way back to the main space. At this time, Li Qia's left hand pressured the main space. More spatial runes wove together. A huge portal emerged with countless coordinates inside. It seemed as if every coordinate in the 9 worlds could be found within this portal. Clang! In the blink of an eye, he locked onto a particular coordinate. With a loud bang, a portal emerged on the other end. A majestic valley appeared before everyone. It was an island in the shape of a valley with an auspicious and mighty aura. Chapter 1323. Space Control. Anyone who saw this great island would instantly know that it had experienced countless blessings. A great foundation was laid here, rendering the island untouchable. Regal Valley. The crowd exclaimed since they knew just what it was. At this time, a spatial channel was created to stretch from the war cliff all the way to the sky of this island. It was transparent and even an army of millions could travel through it at the same time. A spatial channel. An old paragon blurted out. How can this be? A spatial channel can only be created by an immortal emperor's Dao platform on top of being powered by an incredible amount of immortal emperor refined jades. There is no way he could open one with his bare hands. A spatial channel was an advanced method of teleportation. It was used by immortal emperors to teleport their legions to the rest of the 9 worlds for expeditions. Compared to regular teleportation, this method was more direct, stable, and durable. More importantly, these passages could deliver larger objects or even an entire legion. With such a wide channel like the one Li Qia had just opened, it could transmit virtually anything. Boom! At this time, the Cancer Divine formation finally broke through the barrier and made its way back to the main space. There we go! Li Qia noticed the incoming formation and made more spatial runes flow. The tiny space of the formation suddenly turned bright. In the blink of an eye, Li Qia performed space shifting to move the formation into the spatial channel. Boom! The attacking formation was suddenly teleported to the sky of the Regal Valley. What are you doing? The Overlord's expression changed into one of horror. He blew the conch and told the formation to stop its attack. However, the formation was billions of miles away, so his order simply couldn't come through. He wanted to jump into the pathway as well, but Ruyan smiled and blocked his path. It's a bit too late to leave now. Kill her! The Overlord commanded his disciples nearby. At the same time, several ancestors rushed out to stop Ruyan. Rumble! The sky quaked as the Grand Formation unleashed its attack straight towards the Regal Valley. Who dares to act impudently at the Regal Valley? The sudden attack made some ancestors in the valley retaliate. Barriers were erected instantly while experts rushed to the sky in order to stop the formation. Ah! Screams resounded left and right. All the experts rushing in the air were killed by the formation. It kept on reaching for the valley with an unstoppable momentum. Rumble! The entire valley quaked with loud explosions. The formation was too flexible, just like a living crab. It crazily destroyed everything nearby as mountains crumbled. More cries could be heard as experts fell to the might of this great formation. Boom! Once the formation reached deep enough into the valley, a mighty sea god's aura rose to the sky. A second crab rushed out. This one had a majestic aura, even stronger than the first. A second Cancer Divine formation. This is the valley's ace. The people who crossed the spatial channel murmured after seeing this scene. It's time to launch the attack. Li Qia smiled as his death chapter lit up and exuded death energy. Crash! Even more skeletons climbed out of the seabed. In a short period of time, more than 1 million skeletons lined up around this region. All of them had soul flames in their eyes. The entire region seemed to be enveloped by this death energy. This gigantic army stunned everyone. The sheer number of figures made it look like this was a kingdom of the dead. This is the Legion from the Roaring Conch and the Alliance. They were buried here after dying as well. An old man who knew about the war back then immediately recognized them. Begin! Li Qia smiled and used his space removal on the Great Legion before using space shifting to move them all into the spatial pathway. In the blink of an eye, this legion was teleported to the Regal Valley. Boom! They descended from the sky above the valley right away. Such a scene was too shocking and made countless people gasp. Just imagine, 1 million skeletons abruptly showing up in one sky. This was quite a terrifying matter. The disciples from the Regal Valley were horrified. Before they could calm down, they were met with a terrible slaughter. The skeletal army acted like reapers harvesting the lives of these disciples. More screams echoed throughout the valley with blood spraying everywhere alongside beheaded skulls. One fell after another. Kill! At this time, these disciples had no choice but to shout for battle. They rushed to meet the oncoming army since there was no other way out. The spectators were astonished. The Lithodides sea god would never have imagined that his own legion and the one he defeated would make their way into the regal valley to destroy his lineage. The overlord crazily howled. Die! His eyes were bloodshot as he gritted his teeth. His disciples and several other ancestors mustered their might in order to make way for the overlord to return to the valley. However, regardless of how desperately they struggled, they couldn't break through Lu Ruyan. She was the lone gatekeeper taking down one wave of experts after another. Even the ancestors couldn't do anything under her suppression. Being unarmed didn't seem to slow her down. It only made her appear even more tyrannical. Baz! The ancestors began to sacrifice their longevity blood for the next attack. Lu Ruyan exuded a great brilliance and opened an all-devouring black hole. Heaven Devourer Evil Physique. This was one of the three great immortal physiques of the Void Imperfection 3 schools. Moreover, their physique laws were quite incredible even if they were inferior to the ones from the physique scripture. More explosions came about. Even the ancestors' blood sacrifice and altars shattered, unable to handle retaliation from the powerful evil physique. In just a split second, their altars collapsed along with their bodies. Even the overlord was crushed as blood gushed out of his body. If he didn't have a sea god's weapon, he would have died under the power of this immortal physique as well. The crowd was amazed. To many, this was their first time seeing just how strong Ruyan was. The overlord was aware of the terrible situation and turned to flee. Clank! A sword hymn resounded in the sky, accompanied by a slash from another impressive physique. He was shocked at such a magnificent strike and had to use his weapon in response. Xueqi suddenly appeared before him. She cultivated the sacred spring physique, allowing her to have a boundless and majestic vitality. Even the most ordinary technique powered by this physique would be dozens or even 100 times stronger than normal. Even his sea god's weapon couldn't withstand this sky-tearing sword slash and was blown away. Clank! The fleeing overlord was nailed into a cliff. The crowd shuddered once more. Ruyan was not the only one who was powerful since Gensher was just about equal. Even experts like the overlord from sea god lineages couldn't contend against them. The Void Imperfection 3 schools have always been this strong. Both sea demons and charming spirits felt chills tingling through their spine. All along, this sect had always maintained a low profile. Among the younger generation, Ruyan and Gensher were not as famous as the Sea Shield Prince and his peers. However, there shouldn't be any doubts about their strength. Ruyan came closer to look at the nailed overlord and chuckled. You like to use poison, right? Good, I'll show you the real way of using poison. It would have been easy for Gensher to kill the overlord. However, Xueqi didn't give the order, so she decided to go easy on him. Ruyan took out a wooden thorn as thin as a strand of silk and quickly stabbed it into his forehead at lightning speed. Ah! The overlord screamed miserably. Even a brute like him couldn't bear this kind of pain. His mournful cries resounded across the firmaments. Chapter 1324. Attack on the Regal Valley. A horrifying scene took place. The overlord's body actually melted. Even though his eyes were still there, his body turned into a pile of soft, muddy mush. Moreover, roots came out of what was left of his body and stuck along the cliff. He became a horrifying abomination. Despite this new form, his sanity was still intact. In fact, he watched the whole grotesque transformation. The crowd was frightened after the emergence of this monster. Ruyan chuckled in amusement. Do you know the name of this poison? It is called Back to the Roots. Not only will your body melt, your true fate will follow suit. If I don't let you die, you will be hanging here in this abominable form for several hundred years. Everyone lost their minds after seeing this gigantic whirlpool. Even paragons turned pale as they shouted its name. Someone uncontrollably blurted, "Impossible! How can the great maelstrom appear in our sea?" At this time, the souls of many sea demons left their bodies in fear. If the maelstrom was really here, then the end of the dragon demon sea as well as their race was coming. No, this isn't the maelstrom appearing in our sea. Xueqi is connecting two different spaces. A shocked master elaborated while heaving a sigh of relief. Boom! The sea god's intent had no time to deal with Li Qie now. It immediately turned back to fight against the power of the maelstrom. Crack! A burst of breaking noises resounded. Even though the intent wanted to stabilize the space around the valley, it was already too late. The foundation built by lithodity began to crack in many places. Li Qie smiled after seeing this scene. This is space connection. What a shame. One wrong step is all it takes to lose everything. If the foundation didn't take action and continued to protect the valley, I wouldn't have been able to connect the valley's space to the maelstrom space. Space connection was the next level of spatial teleportation, a technique even more advanced than spatial channels. It was part of the space control art as well. Chapter 1325. Massacre space connection was different from spatial portals and channels. The latter two acted as bridges from one place to another. Space connection was something else. It could connect everything in two different spaces. For example, it could direct the flow of seawater from one space to another. This was why it was more advanced than the other two types. At this time, Li Qie has connected the spaces of the valley and maelstrom. He used the relentless power of the maelstrom to tear apart the sea god's foundation. If the foundation chose to defend the regal valley from the start, it would have been much more difficult for Li Qie to complete the connection, as it would require much more resources and effort. However, the foundation was activated and all of its power was focused on the sea god's will in order to destroy the skeletal army. Because of this, the foundation grew lax on guarding the regal valley's space, creating a hole for Li Qie. At the same time, the maelstrom space was immobile and rigid. It was countless times stronger than the valley's. This led to the power of the whirlpool channeling itself into the valley's space in a natural manner. Bang! Within a short period of time, the foundation was torn apart by the maelstrom. Without its power, the sea god's intent lost its strength and turned bleak right away. At this point, it wouldn't be able to protect the regal valley any longer. In an instant, the entire valley was sucked into the maelstrom. Under the space connection, everyone could see the valley appearing in the maelstrom space. No! The overlord pitifully screamed with his hoarse and nebulous voice. Clank crack! The entire valley was ground into little pieces by the maelstrom and sucked into its depths. The whole region vanished. Bang! The valley's space was destroyed as well, so the connection was severed. The maelstrom disappeared before everyone's eyes. At this point, what initially used to be the regal valley was now a void zone. Everything had returned to the origin. It was as if nothing had ever existed in this place. All traces of the valley and the lithodity sea god have been erased. From now on, these existences would only exist in legends. Li Qie returned to the Warcliff using his spatial channel and casually cut it off. He stood in the sky with an air of indifference. Faces paled when met with his sweeping glare. It could be said that from beginning to end, Li Qie didn't personally attack the regal valley. He only controlled space in addition to the skeletal army. That was more than enough to annihilate the regal valley. A sea god's lineage disappeared just like that. There was no supreme master or imperial weapons, just exquisite space manipulation. Anyone who carefully thought about this matter would shudder in fear. After a long time, a great character murmured, Li Qie has mastery over space from cultivating a wondrous secret technique. Many cultivators struggled to regain their minds from this scene. All along, when it came to merit laws, outside of fate and longevity laws, techniques were widely discussed. The more pertinent ones included offense, defense, and suppression. Of course, there were also techniques that involved banishment and sealing, but these were rarely used on the real battlefield. As for space-controlling abilities, it was even rarer. Few cultivators were capable of cultivating these types of laws. Most could only use it as a side branch and wouldn't focus on it as their main study. Li Qie's actions today were a real eye-opener. People got to witness the terrifying power of space control. One could even say that by grasping this art, one could sweep through all enemies while always being in a safe position. Controlling space was the same as grasping the fundamental basis of war. Someone murmured after calming down. Li Qie's display was very shocking, but it also filled people with regret because this was a rarely researched field. Li Qie returned and looked at the overlord hanging on the cliff. He chuckled and said, "Treating me as prey? You still think you're qualified to do so? You are no different from an ant in my eyes. I normally wouldn't bother dealing with an ant, but unfortunately, you lack all sense of propriety, thinking that an ant like you could hunt a true dragon. So not only did I crush an ant like you, I also put an end to your ant's nest as well. He paused for a moment before continuing. I put you and your valley down not because we are enemies nor because you tried to ambush me. It was only because I found you to be an annoyance. Someone who chases after prey to satisfy your own perverted desires. If, say, you were personally going on the hunt using your own abilities to kill your prey, then I would find your courage admirable. Alas, a descendant of a sea god would choose to use such despicable means and even drag down the entire regal valley. Look now, I have done you a favor. You are finished, and so is the valley. He ended with a sneer. Winner takes all. There is nothing else to say. Do as you will. The overlord was lost in despair with no other thoughts in his mind. Lichia snorted. You think you deserve that phrase? Someone like you isn't qualified to even enter the stage to be a competitor. You're only a common street thug at best. Lichia's words were quite merciless, but no one questioned him. He had earned the right to say them. Moreover, most people didn't like the overlord and his devious nature. It was just that they were wary of the valley's power in the past, so they didn't voice their displeasure. Now, both the valley and the overlord were finished. Many were secretly applauding, but some felt a bit of regret since the entire valley was annihilated. Remember that this was a sea god's lineage. It must have countless treasures hidden in its trove along with spirit grasses and divine trees. If one could take down the valley, just these resources alone could have lasted them a lifetime. The overlord shouted with his dull voice. Kill me if you dare. Killing you will only dirty my hands. The only reason you are still alive is so that you could watch the valley being destroyed. Lichia smiled then looked at Ruyan. Ruyan smiled back. If you wish for it, he can live here for several hundred years. To borrow his own words, a fate worse than death. He's only an ant. There's no need to show off my cruelty by letting him scream for hundreds of years. Lichia chuckled in response. She replied, if that's the case then I'll send him off. It's about time anyway. The overlord didn't try to struggle. He slowly closed his eyes since the valley was destroyed and his game was over. Even if he lived on, he had shamed his ancestors as the sinner of the regal valley. To the hopeless overlord, death was no longer frightening, it was a type of relief. Ruyan flipped her palm and a wooden thorn flew out. It was the poisonous thorn that pierced the overlord's forehead earlier. After it was pulled out, the overlord rooted in the cliff suddenly withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Next, his body turned into powder and dispersed into the sea. There was not the slightest trace of him remaining. A true death. The poison was true to its name. He returned to his roots. In the end, the victim would return to the soil in their entirety. Lichia turned to leave the war cliff after watching his death. However, in this split second, a ray shot forward from the same cliff where the overlord took root earlier. It was too sudden. There was no one there. Thus this attack was completely unexpected. Having just killed his enemy, Lichia was at his most vulnerable moment. Who would expect for someone to ambush him right now? This ray was even faster than a meteor or lightning. It instantly stabbed his back. It all happened too quickly as the assassin was only inches away from him. Lu Ruyan couldn't even call out in time before the ray made contact. Chapter 1326. Second assassination attempt. Everyone saw this ray pierce through Lichia's back with incredible speed. Time seemed to have frozen into a vivid image, depicting his downfall. Many people stopped breathing. It was as if an invisible hand was clutching their throats. Ruyan's and Gensher's hearts jumped out of their chests. Lichia's power was as clear as day when he easily destroyed the regal valley alone. However, such a great genius basking in triumph was assassinated. This sudden reversal of plot was a bit unbearable. After the cold glint penetrated Lichia's back, the assassin finally revealed herself. It was Sima Yujian. No one saw her hiding in the cliff. Not even experts like Ruyan and Gensher. One must admit that she was a capable assassin. Not only was her stealth matchless, she could seize the most opportune moment to deliver a fatal blow, evident by what had just transpired. There was no better opportunity to kill Lichia than that moment. In this split second, she thought that she had succeeded. However, she quickly felt that something was amiss. Lichia was indeed standing there and her sword had pierced through him. Alas, there was no gushing blood or miserable screams. He stood there quietly without any reaction, as if the sword had pierced someone else. She was aware of the problem. At the same time, an older big shot outside of the Warcliff also noticed the anomaly. He exclaimed after the realization, "He isn't in this space." People were surprised to hear this. They didn't expect for Li Qie to not be in this space. It was a huge distance, but no one saw him take flight. This was displaced space, another technique in Li Qie's arsenal. One could clearly see the person standing there and would feel that they were mere inches away. However, there existed an unreachable gap of one or several different spaces. Baz! Yujin realized this right away. Her long sword turned radiant as if countless suns had just exploded. With this empowerment, the blade traveled with a speed faster than time itself by tenfold. It pierced through time and space to reach Li Qie's space, aiming for his neck. She was indeed remarkable, and her speed had reached the extreme. To be able to react so quickly and adapt to his new space, anyone would have been skewered by her swift reaction speed regardless of their space mastery. Unfortunately, fortune eluded her. Her opponent just happened to be Li Qie. The terrifying sword glint stopped right before Li Qie. His 2 fingers were gripping her sword. While looking at the emotionless girl, Li Qie chuckled and flatly stated, "Not bad, your sword speed is enough to reign over the younger generation. You have done a good job cultivating the god-slaying Dao. Unfortunately, you have met me." It had extreme speed and horrifying destructive power. Even a god king's weapon would be instantly pierced. This was the weapon she used to assassinate the white whale god king. However, it could only shoot once before becoming useless for a period of time. She didn't expect to fail in damaging Li Qie in the slightest because she wasn't aware of his counterattack and immortal physiques. Under the acceleration of the soaring immortal physique, Li Qie's indestructible diamond fist had incalculable power. Even a magical blow from the dragon cannon couldn't withstand its might. Chapter 1327. God-slaying Dao. She was intimidated while standing there. Her mind didn't return and she had forgotten about fleeing. The world still has a few god-slaying dragon cannons? Li Qie gave an amused smile while looking at the blank-minded girl. She was shocked and regained her wits to run once more. This was met with Li Qie's quip. "It's too late to run now. Come, accept your imprisonment." With that, his 5 fingers spread out and aimed straight for her. His palm covered the heaven and earth and suppressed myriad realms. Regardless of her efforts, she couldn't escape from his grasp. Right when she was about to be trapped within his attack, a sword left its sheath with a loud hymn. Someone took action. His sword came sweeping by and turned into countless majestic mountains, profound and steady. It came straight for Li Qie's gigantic palm. Boom! Li Qie's attack shattered the countless mountains before him. The attacker just now staggered backward as well. Swift Dao God. People blurted in surprise after seeing who it was. The person who saved Yujin was the current lord of the Swift Dao sacred ground, her junior brother. He quickly cupped his fists towards Li Qie and said, "Brother Li, you are a great man. Won't you be magnanimous this time and let it go?" She refused to accept his help and coldly uttered, "Scram, I don't need you to take care of me." The Swift Dao God's expression didn't change as he earnestly said, "Senior sister, protecting every disciple of the sacred ground is my duty. I am no longer someone from the sacred ground. Get the hell out of my sight." Yujin's expression was cold, choosing not to show any gratefulness. "Senior sister, you have not been expelled from the sacred ground, so you will always be considered its disciple." The celestial god shook his head. Li Qie looked at the two and became amused. Such love between fellow disciples. Which one of you will come first to die? Li, I dare to accept the consequences of my own doing. I will fight you. The girl still had a surging bloodthirst and a will to fight with a sword in her hand. The celestial god, on the other hand, started to beseech Li Qie. "Brother Li, my sister only wanted to use this chance to polish her grand Dao. I hope you can forgive her once. Our sacred ground will pay for your losses." She coldly stated, "I have nothing to do with the Swift Dao sacred ground." Li Qie smirked after seeing the exchange between the two and eventually said, "I'm someone who finds mercy to be a noble quality. Since you were able to escape from me once, I shall also spare you this time." He coolly left after stating this with a laugh. Yujin and the celestial god were stunned after seeing this. The celestial god naturally didn't think that Li Qie was afraid of him. Someone like Li Qie simply wouldn't put anyone in his sight. He only walked a couple of steps away before turning his head and smilingly told Sima Yujin, "The next time we meet, I hope you will have the coiling dragon sword in hand. Don't let me down." With that, he finally left with Ruyan and Zhenshi. Sima Yujin stood there looking silly. She didn't expect such a result after the failed assassination since she was mentally prepared to die. However, what stunned her even more was that Li Qie knew about the coiling dragon sword. No one should know about its existence. In fact, she wasn't the only one who looked silly. Many people were astounded all the same. They didn't expect for someone as ruthless as Li Qie to easily forgive her like this. From his previous conduct, they knew that opposing him wouldn't end well. For example, the Lithodity Overlord. He even took the Regal Valley down with him. But now when Yujin tried to assassinate him twice, Li Qie actually decided to spare her. People began to wonder if Li Qie actually had a merciful side. Someone murmured, "He is completely unpredictable." Yujin calmed down and glanced at the celestial god before leaving without saying anything. The celestial god told Sima Yujin, "Senior sister, why not return to our sect? Master and the others miss you." However, she turned a blind eye to him and disappeared into the horizon without giving him a second glance. The celestial god gently sighed without commenting. He sheathed his sword before placing it on his back and seated himself in the small boat to take his leave as well. The others saw that the play was over, so they left the war cliff for the Bone Sea. The news of the Regal Valley's destruction spread overnight. Many people listened to the process and were quite frightened. Li Qie was now even more renowned in the world. Meanwhile, the Evil Devourer School's boat continued forward towards the Bone Sea. On the boat, Li Qie sat quietly with Ruyan and Zhenshi to his left and right. Zhenshi was boiling some tea for him while Ruyan peeled some fruit and personally fed him. "Young noble, are you friends with Yujin seniors?" Zhenshi grew quite curious after seeing Li Qie spare Sima Yujin. He was not the merciful type to spare her just because of the celestial god's plead. Ruyan fed another fruit straight into his mouth before smiling. "Do you really need to think about this? It's so obvious. Yujin grew up to be quite pretty, so young noble spared her this time in order to make her warm his bed later." Of course, she was only joking. Shangguan Fian and Gongsun Meiyu were both peerless beauties, yet Li Qie killed them ruthlessly and decisively. He didn't spare them just because they were pretty. Therefore, he didn't spare Yujin for her beauty. It must have been some other reason. Li Qie glanced at the vast sea and eventually answered, "She has a connection with me from cultivating the god-slaying Tao. I suppose you can say that her seniors are my old friends." He plunged into quiet contemplation afterward. Sima Yujin probably didn't know that the god-slaying Tao was created by Li Qie when he was still the Dark Crow. During the dark years of the ancient Ming's reign, they were mighty and ruled over the 9 worlds. This was especially true during immortal Emperor Tian Tu's prosperous generation when his race reached their peak. In that period, Li Qie's military might couldn't compete in an all-out war against the entire ancient Ming, so he chose to use indirect methods. He created the god-slaying Tao and established the god-slaying Knight Corps. It could be said that this was the most prominent and terrifying assassination group. The god-slaying Corps never showed themselves to the world and remained in the darkness. However, they set up many opportunities for the eventual victory, so it was full of accolades and merits. When the ancient Ming era ended and the Emperor's era ushered in, a new dawn emerged for the 9 worlds. At that time, the god-slaying Knight Corps had completed its mission. There was no longer a need for assassinations. It stopped training new assassins. The older generation began to die from old age or hid in seclusion, and their leader chose to live in seclusion as well. Before he left, Li Qie handed control of the Corps over to the leader, including the manuals of the god-slaying Tao, the coiling dragon sword that represented the highest authority of the Corps, and the god-slaying dragon cannons. Li Qie told the leader that it was up to him to decide whether to continue the Corps or not. He didn't know what they ultimately chose. Later on, he never saw them again. The god-slaying Knight Corps disappeared from this world, and no one trained in the god-slaying Tao. Sima Yujin's appearance had let Li Qie see the Tao and the cannon once more. This was the reason why he chose to spare her. Otherwise, he would have killed her on the second assassination attempt. Ruyan and Zhenshi didn't pry any further after seeing his quiet contemplation. The atmosphere became very quiet as the two continued with their chores. The Bone Sea was lively once again. Many great powers and imperial lineages in Heaven's spirit flocked to this region. Even old monsters who didn't come out before made appearances. This was one of the 12 burial grounds. It was located in a remote area of the Dragon Demon Sea, and it was also the most dangerous and mysterious location. However, there was one very strange aspect about it. Legend states that every single sea god would travel to the Bone Sea at least once. No one knew the reason, however. There was one particular speculation. People thought that the trident came from the Bone Sea, so all the sea gods would come to see it. Chapter 1332. The profound sea monarch's decision. After hearing Li Qia's response, the monarch's eyes lit up with an oppressive bite. An imperial aura emerged. Even paragons would feel pressured under his momentum. However, Li Qia was completely unaffected and nonchalantly sat there. The monarch slowly uttered while maintaining his glare. "It seems like you are full of confidence. Do you think you alone can sweep through the entire heaven spirit world?" Li Qia smiled and shook his head. "No. I know that with my own strength, it is more than enough to ravage the entire 9 worlds." Anyone else would find Li Qia's words to be blasphemously haughty. Ravaging the 9 worlds was a statement no one would say outside of immortal emperors. The glint in the monarch's eyes sharpened during this stare-down. His whole mind was focused on Li Qia, as if he wanted to figure out something by looking into his eyes. One with a haunting gaze and one seated leisurely. This went on for some time. Eventually, the monarch dispersed his horrifying momentum and converged his aura before speaking. "No matter how strong you are, there is always someone stronger. It was her lack of propriety for opposing you. She didn't understand the immensity of the heaven and earth." Many would be surprised to hear these words come from the monarch. One must remember that Li Qia killed his favorite concubine, yet he wasn't trying to obtain revenge right now. It was simply inconceivable. "Profound King, I actually thought you were here for revenge." Ruyan came out after finishing her tasks. She smiled after hearing his response. Because the Profound Monarch was also the king of the Profound Dynasty, others called him the Profound King as well. The monarch faintly smiled in response. "Schoolmaster Liu, I will repay certain enmities. If my concubine's killer was on the same level as me, I would absolutely kill them, not only for revenge but also to establish my authority." She charmingly quipped. "Then what about my young noble? Are you saying that you are not on his level?" The monarch gave Li Qia a cold glance and snorted without answering Ruyan. Li Qia sat there and chuckled. "This is a bit surprising. Anyone else would have a hard time enduring this anger." The monarch scowled. "Don't be surprised. If it wasn't for the fact that I am unable to see through your true power, I would have made mincemeat out of you. It was her fault for being blind and seeking her own death by opposing you." Ruyan asked. "Hey now, Profound King, these words are too frank. Are you not afraid that your other concubines will be hurt from hearing this?" The monarch responded. "Schoolmaster, there's no need to goad me. She was only a woman. This isn't enough for me to involve the entire Profound Dynasty. Moreover, I gave her wealth and prestige. She, on the other hand, didn't find me strong allies and instead only provoked a supreme enemy. Her death was her own fault." The monarch betrayed all expectations. No one would be able to endure their favorite concubine being killed, yet he could let go of this grudge and not try to obtain revenge. Li Qia smiled and told the monarch, "Interesting, sit down for a drink." The Taoist finally spoke at this time. "Brother, why not come with me to the Bone Sea? We can support each other." The monarch cupped his fists towards the Taoist before glaring at Li Qia to say, "Senior brother, I appreciate your goodwill. However, my willingness to forego this grudge does not mean that I want to befriend him. Even though I do not want revenge, I still don't like him. There's no need for the drink." Li Qia clapped his hands approvingly, quite pleased with the response. He said, "Very straightforward. How interesting. Because of this response, I will spare your life even if we become enemies later on." The monarch didn't reply to such domineering words. He gave Li Qia one last side eye before turning around to leave. However, he suddenly stopped after remembering something. He turned and asked the Taoist, "Senior brother, it has been a few years. Have you made any progress with senior aunt?" "Brother, what are you saying?" The Taoist blushed and shook his head. The monarch stared at him and pressed on. "Why bother hiding when it has reached this level? You aren't the only one who knows this, even she herself knows about it. As the saying goes, don't let one's own fertile water flow into others' fields. She is such a beauty, yet you still want her to marry an outsider?" If you like her, you need to make a move. Don't try to egg me on, I have my own discretion. The Taoist's face became hot as he glared at the monarch. Stop, senior brother. I know you too well. Everything about you is excellent outside of your lack of ambition. If I had your talents, I would have reached for the heavens will already. This Meng Zhintian or whatever, I would have cut him down. You are blessed with an unparalleled aptitude, yet you're wasting it away by idling about. The monarch showed a disdainful look. He continued on, nothing can be done about that. One does not necessarily have to become an immortal emperor. However, if you don't even dare to chase after the woman you like, then you would be failing your supreme blessings even more. Senior brother, you must reconsider. If you don't court her, someone else will win her over. She has many suitors in heaven's spirit, after all. With that, the monarch finally left. The Taoist only wryly smiled without responding to the monarch. Many eyes were staring at the giant boat outside. They thought that a fight would break out between the monarch and Li Qie. However, they were surprised to see the monarch leave. How could such a prestigious character endure this anger? Nobody knew what was going on, but they didn't dare to comment in the presence of the monarch. The monarch didn't care for their opinions either and bored. Other youths would shock the world by becoming a god king at such a young age, but the Taoist wasn't very famous in heaven's spirit. This wasn't only because he was low-key, it was also because he had no ambition to compete with others. He preferred to travel calmly without needless thoughts and desires. This made his cultivation even stronger despite his unknown reputation. Many people didn't even know who he was. Those who did might not know the extent of his strength. The Void Imperfection schools had ties with the ancient Spirit Island, so they knew his real strength. The powerful Taoist was very insightful as well. The moment he saw Li Qie, he didn't dare to put on airs. But really, the ancient purity blade is not bad at all. Li Qie added right after the Taoist became relieved. I'm actually missing a sword, maybe I should think about taking it? The Taoist felt awkward once more as he replied. Brother Li, you are too funny. If this was any other true treasure, I wouldn't actually care for it. Li Qie said in a serious manner. However, this blade is extraordinary and contains a great mystery. Such earnest words left the Taoist speechless and the two girls smiling. I'm just messing with you. Li Qie added after seeing the slightly alarmed Taoist. This sword is not bad, but I wouldn't have waited until now if I truly wanted it. The Taoist cupped his fists and said, Brother Li, this little brother is very grateful for your generosity. Li Qie gently waved his sleeve. The 4 branches have remarkable contributions to the 9 worlds. The descendants of immortal Emperor Gu Chun are wise as well. However, I do have a bit of enmity with your 4 branches. Whether this escalates or not will depend on your sect. He smiled after saying this. The Taoist's heart jumped after seeing his smile. He felt that Li Qie actually wanted the 4 branches to come looking for trouble, like a lamb walking into the jaws of a tiger. The Taoist was certain of this and earnestly answered. My junior brother is a great man, I'm sure he will know how to tread. It was no secret that Li Qie killed Gong Sun Mei Yu, the profound monarch's concubine. Everyone knew that he was very fond of her, so he might not be able to swallow this anger. Nevertheless, the Taoist felt quite confident. This was not because of their sect's power, but because he had a deep friendship with the profound monarch. He understood the monarch and his personality, so he believed that he would be able to take care of this enmity. Of course, Li Qie didn't really take this problem to heart. If the monarch wanted revenge for his concubine, he would be ready. Li Qie kept on looking at the sword behind the Taoist's back with some longing. He eventually smiled and said, I know that your golden era palace has many beauties as well. Besides the sword of your 4 branches, I'm also interested in the palace. Of course, he wasn't interested in the beauties but some things that immortal Emperor Yan Shi left behind. Chapter 1329. Bonicia's entrance. Taoist Pure Sun smiled to respond to Li Qie. If Brother Li comes to my 4 branches, I'm willing to be your guide. We can take a tour of the Golden Era Palace. With your charisma, I'm sure you will have a considerable harvest there. Humans and our 4 branches have deep ties, so I know you can be at home there. The Taoist's words were reasonable. Immortal Emperor Yan Shi was a human. Moreover, the human bloodline at the palace and even the entire 4 branches was doing very well. Ruyan was quite amused as she playfully said, The truth is that the Golden Era Palace Master is a supreme beauty. Just one glance at her could enamor countless others. Young noble, the Taoist can introduce you to her. With your peerless charm, I'm sure you can win her heart. Li Chia smiled as well and asked the Taoist, "Is this the truth?" The Taoist hesitated for a moment. Well, even the elegant Gensher chuckled. It was clear that Ruyan was toying with Taoist pure sun. "Oh, you don't want to introduce your martial aunt to our young noble?" Ruyan's enchanting posture was quite bewitching. The current palace master was the Taoist's martial aunt. It wasn't because she was older than him. It was just that she was one generation above him. The Taoist turned red and awkward. He became quite hesitant unlike before. He eventually answered, "If there is a chance when you visit us, I will certainly introduce you to her." Gensher slightly shook her head after hearing this. "Pure son, you are courageous and wise and your talents are peerless. Unfortunately, there are a few things." She didn't finish her sentence. "Young noble, did you hear that? You must visit the palace. If there is a chance to win her over, you mustn't disappoint the Taoist." Ruyan was just like a little demoness. Her swaying laughter belonged to a devil. The Taoist knew that Ruyan was deliberately trying to be annoying, but he couldn't do anything outside of smiling awkwardly. Li Chia instantly knew what was going on after seeing the Taoist's expression. At this time, a disciple came in and reported, "Schoolmaster, we have arrived at the Bone Sea. We're here." Both the girls stood up from excitement. Li Chia's eyes turned serious. He went to the deck to look at this region before smiling. Things are going to be exciting again. In front of them were incomparable mountains blocking everyone's path. They appeared without warning as if they were guardians preventing everyone from entering. The spectators felt an illusion that the Dragon Demon Sea ended right here. These mountains ahead were not part of a mountain range. There were tiny gaps among them. Of course, they were small relative to the huge size of the mountains. But for the people here, they were large enough and could accommodate many big ships side by side. This huge gap in the center of the row of mountains gave the feeling that a mountain had collapsed here for some unknown reason. If one could stand in the sky of the Dragon Demon Sea and look down on this long row of mountains, they would find that they seemed to be a lower jaw. If it wasn't for the flowers and vegetation, these mountains would look like a series of teeth. If there was an inverted row of mountains in the sky, then it would make up the upper half of the jaw. The missing part in the center would be a missing front tooth. Of course, the majority wouldn't believe that this was a row of teeth because it spanned across the Dragon Demon Sea for millions of miles. Its length was too long to be imagined. If it was truly the lower half of a jaw, then just how frightening was this monster? It could swallow the entire heaven spirit world. After going through these mountains, another ocean appeared before them. However, there was a distinct difference between this one and the previous. The water of the Dragon Demon Sea was incomparably blue with waves everywhere. However, the sea ahead was turbid as far as the eyes could see, making it seem to be a gateway to hell. A chilling sensation assaulted all spectators. This feeling was especially true while standing on the collapsed mountain. In fact, this analogy wasn't unreasonable. Those who had been to the Bone Sea before knew that this was only the entrance and not the Bone Sea itself. The experienced crowd knew that one would only know what true fear was when they actually reached the Bone Sea. There were many cultivators waiting at this gap between the mountains and the ridges nearby. This was because everyone was waiting for the bone ships. Without them, there was no way of getting to the Bone Sea regardless of the treasure used. The first-timers didn't believe this statement too much. After waiting for a long time and seeing how none of the bone ships have come, someone grew impatient and said, "Is this sea really that bizarre? My heirloom boat can travel across anything. I don't buy that it can't cross this sea." This skeptic summoned his boat. It was indeed extraordinary since it was exuding a divine light. It slowly sailed into the muddy waters. However, it didn't reach more than 100 feet before it began to sink. Next, some clattering sounds came about. This treasure ship completely sank into the sea and disappeared. The cultivator witnessed the whole scene and was dumbfounded due to disbelief. His ship had an amazing origin and was capable of crossing through all seas, but it has now sunk. He quivered in horror and praised his fortune for not being on it when it sank, or else his life would have been forfeited. An older cultivator told the youth, "How could it be that easy to enter the Bone Sea? Not to mention you, even a god king would drown in those muddy waters." A sea demon added, "The Bone Sea spares no victims. Even the most incredible ship would sink, And yours is no exception. In terms of evasion and purification, no one is better than the Immaculate Expanse. But its master, Taoist Lin, would still obediently wait here for a bone ship. His void imperfection physique is virtually invincible, yet he still doesn't dare to test his luck. Don't mess around without a bone ship. A cultivator stated. I heard that outside of the sea conch, no one else dared to not use the bone ships to enter. Yes, the sea conch is an exception. A sea demon replied. Rumor has it that their progenitor, the conch god, obtained a bunch of een bones and crocodile wood. With them, he was able to create some vessels that could cross the bone sea. A charming spirit suddenly interjected. Is Taoist Lin here right now? Not just the Taoist, the extreme young monarch, the swift Tao celestial god, they're all here too. This trip to the bone sea will be very lively. An old cultivator responded. Towering waves will rise with the arrival of Meng Zhentian as well. After hearing this, someone murmured, a duel of geniuses. A paragon chimed in. That day will come, but Taoist Lin's group should be fine. They don't have a strong desire for the heaven's will. However, the celestial god and his peers must have the heaven's will. A great battle is inevitable. A charming spirit master mused. But who can compete with Meng Zhentian? The celestial god might be strong, but his current self can't contend against Zhentian. Many people pondered these words. Even though some people didn't want to believe it, it was indeed the truth. No one was qualified to compete against Meng Zhentian, at least for now. Fierce is here. During the silence, someone with good vision spotted Li Chie's ship. Many turned around. Sure enough, the giant boat of the Evil Devourer School slowly drifted into the gap. The cultivators nearby quickly made way for them. Even if it wasn't for fierce notoriety, just the name Evil Devourer School was enough for everyone here to back off. Chapter 1330. Bone Ship. The giant boat went into the gap and Li Chie's group came out to the deck. They gazed at the muddy sea in front of them. Many cultivators felt envious after seeing Ruyan and Zhenshi standing next to Li Chie. For many people, to have such beauties by one's side was an incredible stroke of luck. Moreover, they were famous rulers of their respective regions. On the other hand, Taoist Pure Sun was recognized by only a few people. Those who might have heard of his title had never seen him before. Li Chie flatly commented, How many existences have been buried here at the Bone Sea? At this moment, someone suddenly called out, The bone ships are here. Sure enough, several groups of ships were coming closer. They were ships seemingly made out of bones of varying sizes. The bigger ones could accommodate around 10 people while the smaller ones were the size of a canoe. All of them had some skeletons lying on board. They were wearing their own clothes that had rotted completely, but this indicated that they were once living beings or cultivators. Time for us to board. The cultivators in the gap grew restless and wanted to board. Why do you get to go first? Our 3 sects arrived here before you, so we should be first. An expert became unhappy right away. Okay, let's not argue. If we fight before we even get to the Bone Sea, we won't ever get there. An influential paragon stepped out and said, We'll follow the rules. The 3 cloud ballads and the 6 schools from shallow waters were here first, so they get to board. Then the next groups. The cultivators had no objections to this paragon taking charge of the situation and prepared to board. When the bone ships finally arrived at the edge of the muddy sea water, they automatically turned around and headed back for the Bone Sea. A senior immediately shouted once the ships were close enough. Go! Shortly after, many cultivators jumped and got on the closest boats. Many first-timers heaved a sigh of relief after boarding. Get ready to fight. However, the experienced cultivators turned serious and took out their treasures. At this time, the fallen skeletons' eyes turned red as if something was fueling their soul flames. Their figures slowly stood up one after the other. They grabbed the mottled weapons next to them and headed for the cultivators near them. Some howled wildly and opened their mouths to take out some strange treasures before going on the offense. Kill! The cultivators retaliated with a battle cry. Even if they weren't from the same sect, they worked together. Another old cultivator shouted, Watch it, don't sink the boat or we'll be done for. Hey, how come these skeletons aren't attacking you? During this chaotic melee, some cultivators noticed that their peers weren't being attacked and found it quite surprising. One of them happily gloated, Heh, I bought some expensive talismans from Old Chu back at Bones Island so I don't have to worry about them. A strange-looking talisman was attached to him. The skeletons on the ships didn't seem to notice him. Even if they attacked those next to him, they completely ignored him. I also bought some from Old Chu. After seeing this, many others calmed down and took out their wooden boxes, then put these talismans somewhere on their bodies. Baz! However, despite putting on a talisman, a skeleton still attacked them with its blade. He jumped and shouted, "What the hell? I also have a talisman." Hey, you don't know? These talismans are very specific. If you bought a very expensive one, then there will be no problems. However, if you bought one for cheap, then you better change it for another. An experienced cultivator found this quite amusing. The cheapskate immediately put on a different talisman. Sure enough, the skeleton stopped attacking him and went for other people. Damn it! I've changed 5 talismans already. A different cultivator put on many different talismans, yet he was still being attacked. His talismans were completely ineffective. Ah, a miserable scream sounded. One of the cultivators used up all of his talismans, but he was still being targeted. He couldn't handle the attacks of the skeletons and was quickly disposed of by 3 of them. Never be too stingy. The old cultivator saw this and shook his head to say, even though one can buy some good items for cheap from Old Chu, the chance of them being effective is minuscule. Paying an exorbitant price guarantees the quality. In the following moments, screams sounded left and right on these bone ships. Some of the cultivators weren't strong enough even when working together and were killed by the skeletons. Push them into the sea. An experienced cultivator loudly shouted and joined forces to take down these skeletons. Boom! With the help of this powerful cultivator, a group finally took over one of the ships after throwing the skeletons into the sea. They couldn't swim at all and sank into the depths. Crack! However, some were unlucky. One cultivator inadvertently pierced the ship and the seawater rushed in. You're insane! Everyone on the ship turned pale from horror after seeing this. One of the cleverer cultivators managed to jump to the closest bone ship. The slower ones sank with the ship into the water without having the chance to even scream. More ships drifted towards the bone sea while screams and battle cries echoed from them. The 2 sides were still vying for supremacy. After clearing the ships of skeletons, the cultivators could only sit there and let the ships take them away since no one could control the direction. More are coming. After the first batch floated away, another group came along. An old man commanded his disciples, "Get ready, don't be disorderly once we board." Another battle broke out on this second boarding as well. More ships continued to come. The majority of the cultivators could easily jump on them, but the weaker ones would be killed by the skeletons. After a few batches of ships, a large one finally came. It was several times larger than the previous ships and could contain several hundred cultivators. The presiding paragon immediately asked, "Whose turn is it?" The crowd looked around at each other. A schoolmaster explained, "We all know that the larger the ship, the stronger the skeletons inside. Even if it is our turn, we aren't strong enough to seize this ship." This schoolmaster was being very realistic. Even though this huge ship was very tempting, they needed to be strong enough to seize it. "We'll go then." This paragon worked with the other paragons and took their juniors up onto this ship. Another great battle broke out. Li Qia's group was still watching on the deck. Li Qia smiled and told Lu Ruyan, "Get ready, we'll board in a bit. This trip will be dangerous, so don't take your disciples along." Ruyan immediately sent the command. Even though the disciples really wanted to take a look at the Bone Sea, they let go of this thought due to the nature of the trip. They didn't want to drag their schoolmasters down. Li Qia went back inside and told Xiong Qianbei, "Since I have promised to take you to the Bone Sea, prepare yourself. Whether you can get anything is up to your own fortune." Thank you, young noble Li and schoolmasters, for leading the way. After hearing this, the excited old man bowed and went to prepare. After sitting down, Li Qia looked at the calm Taoist pure sun and smilingly asked, "What is your purpose for coming to the Bone Sea?" The Taoist replied with a smile, "I want to take a look at the mythical central area." Li Qia shook his head in response. "You are indeed very strong and capable. However, you should forget about the central area. If something unfortunate were to happen to you there, it would be a great loss for the charming spirits, the heaven spirit world, and the 4 branches because of your innate talents." Li Qia rarely praised others, so his words were indicative of the Taoist's strength. "Then I'll wait until I'm stronger." The Taoist easily abandoned this notion without forcing the issue. Li Qie said, "There are other interesting places at the Bone Sea. Just wait, you will come to find that this trip will not be in vain." The Taoist cupped his fists in response. "Then I'll leave it to Brother Li to guide us." Chapter 1331. Profound Sea Monarch. While Li Qie was chatting with Taoist Pure Sun, a loud commotion came about. A person descended from the sky and aroused the attention of the crowd. This was a youth adorned with a dragon robe and an imperial crown. He carried great momentum just like an emperor on a tour of his kingdom. Countless god monarch rings rotated around his body. Each of them had a god in the center, so it looked as if he had thousands of gods protecting him in addition to millions of citizens in worship. When his rings came together, a towering figure emerged. It gathered the faith of billions, allowing it to be enveloped by his blood energy. This boundless figure didn't look like a shadow at all. Instead, it was more like a true god. It stood behind him and quietly protected this youth. This figure could instantly suppress all paragons and weaker god monarchs. The youth didn't need to do anything. Just this figure alone could sweep through all of his enemies. Now this is a true monarch. The older paragons were slightly astonished. They understood the significance of the shadow behind him. When a cultivator reached a certain level within the paragon realm, they could think about opening up their own territory. This was especially true for those who were capable of entering the path of the Grand Era. They would contemplate starting their own sects or establishing a branch within the existing one. This was because at this particular level, they could accept the tributes of their citizens, allowing them to grow stronger with the blood energy of their vassals. This benefited both their cultivation and battle prowess. On the battlefield, there was a great difference between those who were receiving tributes and those who weren't. As for paragons that reached the true monarch level, not only were they worshipped by their citizens, they would have become deified, thus being nourished by a great amount of blood energy. Someone shouted after seeing the youth. "Profound Sea God Monarch. The king of the Profound Sea Dynasty." Even those who had never seen him before were shaken after hearing his title. This dynasty was part of Gu Chun's 4 branches. An older knowledgeable cultivator with great insight saw the shadow behind him and emotionally stated, "This monarch is quite unfathomable. Not only is he decisive and ambitious, he is also blessed with good fortune. He wants to expand his dynasty's territory." Yes, I heard he could be considered an exceptional individual among the dynasty's wise sages who have helped expand the dynasty. Another charming spirit from the Abyss Sea movingly added, "He treats his citizens quite well, which is why he possesses this powerful visual phenomenon. With so much blood energy from his citizens empowering him, I don't think anyone is stronger than him at the true monarch level." Another paragon from the previous generation made this verdict. Opening more territories was very beneficial to paragons of this level. Because of this, many great powers would have numerous branches erected by their own paragons. Of course, this alone wouldn't be enough. It was not difficult for a true monarch to expand their territory since they would have ample power to seize lands by force. Administration was required for these new territories. Only when one could let their own citizens prosper would they be rewarded during the ceremony for the divine investiture. Their citizens would offer even more vitality, relative to the population and level of prosperity. There was an old saying in the mortal world, if one's belly wasn't full, they wouldn't be thinking about worshipping some random deities or devils. Only when your citizens are blessed by your rule would they grow stronger from a peaceful life. With that, their blood energy would invigorate the territory and the ruler. The stronger the citizens, the stronger the true monarch after the inauguration process. However, it wasn't easy to run multiple kingdoms and bless them with prosperity. Because of this, many god monarchs would abandon their administration and choose to cultivate instead. They would, in turn, use spirit medicines and pills to make up for the lack of energy from their citizens. Even though this was an inferior method, it still gave them a chance to surpass the true monarch level and perhaps even reach the god-king realm. Nevertheless, this had its disadvantages and shortcomings. With a sufficient amount of blood energy, these true monarchs could become something even greater than an ordinary god-king. They could become entities praised as world-dominating god-kings, 9 worlds god-kings, or even a mythical emperor assailant. The profound monarch might not have the ambition to become the immortal emperor, but he is aiming to be an emperor assailant. An experienced paragon commented after seeing the great amount of vitality strengthening the shadow behind the monarch. He was correct. Many talented prodigies could easily surpass the bottleneck of being a true monarch. However, they couldn't govern their citizens well enough, so during their divine inauguration, they would fail to receive a great amount of blood energy. Later on, they could still become a god king, but they would be limited to the grand god king or heavenly god king levels. A cultivator who understood him couldn't help but state, "His edge is far beyond that compared to the other true monarchs. Look, he has the right hand of God." After hearing this, many shifted their attention towards the monarch's right hand. It was different from the rest of his body. His hand was as white as jade and even more exquisite and beautiful than a woman's hand. It was as if it was carved from a perfect piece of jade. It gave off an unparalleled gentleness. Such a flawless hand was beyond criticism. It was no wonder why people would call it the right hand of God. Someone curiously asked, "What is the power of this right hand?" The cultivator who knew about it shook his head. "I'm not quite sure. I heard those who have seen the power of this hand are all dead. Some believe that it is quite mighty. Others state that it could change something from being rotten to magical. It might even contain the mysteries of the gods." Under the eyes of the crowd, the monarch boarded the evil devourer school's boat and went inside. This garnered everyone's full attention because the feud between him and Xueqi was no secret. They all knew that Xueqi killed his favorite concubine. He walked into the internal compartment in a domineering manner as if he was the sole ruler of the world. His eyes swept through the room and saw Taoist pure sun. Despite his imperious temperament, he still bowed and cupped his fists respectfully. "Senior brother, long time no see." He might be a preeminent character to outsiders, but he was still the Taoist's junior brother and showed no signs of arrogance in his presence. "Congratulations, junior brother. Your divine ceremony was quite perfect. It has paved a straight path for you into the future. It is only a matter of time before you surpass me." The Taoist stared at the figure behind the monarch and couldn't help but voice his praise. "I cannot compare with you, senior brother," the monarch smilingly said. Despite his arrogant nature, this sentence was quite sincere. He thought very highly of himself, but he understood his limits very well when standing before his senior brother. Others might not have seen the Taoist's matchless talents, but after growing up with him, he knew of his brother's invincibility and power more than anyone. The Taoist only smiled in response. At this time, the monarch's gaze fell upon Xueqi. It turned quite cold like two divine blades, sharp enough to sever all creations. He lowered his tone. "You are Xueqi." Xueqi smilingly replied, "That's right." The glint that flashed in his eyes gave off a commanding pressure. No one would question his power since he was among the top-ranking members of the younger generation. He stated, "You killed my concubine." Xueqi remained seated there leisurely. "If your concubine's name is Gongsun Meiyu, then yes, I killed your concubine." The cold aura of the monarch bloomed even more. He chillingly said, "Do you know the consequences of opposing me?" "I don't." Xueqi was still all smiles. "However, I know the result of those who antagonize me. A light sentence would be death. A heavy sentence would be sect destruction." The Taoist only sat there with a smile while watching this confrontation between the two. Chapter 1332. The profound sea monarch's decision. After hearing Xueqi's response, the monarch's eyes lit up with an oppressive bite. An imperial aura emerged. Even paragons would feel pressured under his momentum. However, Xueqi was completely unaffected and nonchalantly sat there. The monarch slowly uttered while maintaining his glare, "It seems like you are full of confidence. Do you think you alone can sweep through the entire heaven spirit world?" Xueqi smiled and shook his head. "No. I know that with my own strength, it is more than enough to ravage the entire 9 worlds." Anyone else would find Xueqi's words to be blasphemously haughty. Ravaging the 9 worlds was a statement no one would say outside of immortal emperors. The glint in the monarch's eyes sharpened during this stare-down. His whole mind was focused on Xueqi, as if he wanted to figure out something by looking into his eyes. One with a haunting gaze and one seated leisurely. This went on for some time. Eventually, the monarch dispersed his horrifying momentum and converged his aura before speaking. "No matter how strong you are, there is always someone stronger. It was her lack of propriety for opposing you. She didn't understand the immensity of the heaven and earth." Many would be surprised to hear these words come from the monarch. One must remember that Xueqi killed his favorite concubine, yet he wasn't trying to obtain revenge right now. It was simply inconceivable. Profound King, I actually thought you were here for revenge. Ruyan came out after finishing her tasks. She smiled after hearing his response. Because the Profound Monarch was also the king of the Profound Dynasty, others called him the Profound King as well. The monarch faintly smiled in response. Schoolmaster Liu, I will repay certain enmities. If my concubine's killer was on the same level as me, I would absolutely kill them not only for revenge but also to establish my authority. She charmingly quipped. Then what about my young noble? Are you saying that you are not on his level? The monarch gave Li Qie a cold glance and snorted without answering Ruyan. Li Qie sat there and chuckled. This is a bit surprising. Anyone else would have a hard time enduring this anger. The monarch scowled. Don't be surprised. If it wasn't for the fact that I am unable to see through your true power, I would have made mincemeat out of you. It was her fault for being blind and seeking her own death by opposing you. Ruyan asked. Hey now, Profound King, these words are too frank. Are you not afraid that your other concubines will be hurt from hearing this? The monarch responded. Schoolmaster, there's no need to goad me. She was only a woman. This isn't enough for me to involve the entire Profound Dynasty. Moreover, I gave her wealth and prestige. She, on the other hand, didn't find me strong allies and instead only provoked a supreme enemy. Her death was her own fault. The monarch betrayed all expectations. No one would be able to endure their favorite concubine being killed, yet he could let go of this grudge and not try to obtain revenge. Li Qie smiled and told the monarch, Interesting, sit down for a drink. The Taoist finally spoke at this time. Brother, why not come with me to the Bone Sea? We can support each other. The monarch cupped his fists towards the Taoist before glaring at Li Qie to say, Senior brother, I appreciate your goodwill. However, my willingness to forego this grudge does not mean that I want to befriend him. Even though I do not want revenge, I still don't like him. There's no need for the drink. Li Qie clapped his hands approvingly, quite pleased with the response. He said, Very straightforward, how interesting. Because of this response, I will spare your life even if we become enemies later on. The monarch didn't reply to such domineering words. He gave Li Qie one last side eye before turning around to leave. However, he suddenly stopped after remembering something. He turned and asked the Taoist, Senior brother, it has been a few years. Have you made any progress with Senior Aunt? Brother, what are you saying? The Taoist blushed and shook his head. The monarch stared at him and pressed on. Why bother hiding when it has reached this level? You aren't the only one who knows this, even she herself knows about it. As the saying goes, don't let one's own fertile water flow into others' fields. She is such a beauty, yet you still want her to marry an outsider? If you like her, you need to make a move. Don't try to egg me on, I have my own discretion. The Taoist's face became hot as he glared at the monarch. Stop, senior brother. I know you too well. Everything about you is excellent outside of your lack of ambition. If I had your talents, I would have reached for the heavens will already. This Meng Zhentian or whatever, I would have cut him down. You are blessed with an unparalleled aptitude, yet you're wasting it away by idling about. The monarch showed a disdainful look. He continued on, nothing can be done about that. One does not necessarily have to become an immortal emperor. However, if you don't even dare to chase after the woman you like, then you would be failing your supreme blessings even more. Senior brother, you must reconsider. If you don't court her, someone else will win her over. She has many suitors in heaven's spirit, after all. With that, the monarch finally left. The Taoist only wryly smiled without responding to the monarch. Many eyes were staring at the giant boat outside. They thought that a fight would break out between the monarch and Li Qie. However, they were surprised to see the monarch leave. How could such a prestigious character endure this anger? Nobody knew what was going on, but they didn't dare to comment in the presence of the monarch. The monarch didn't care for their opinions either and boarded a bone ship to head towards the Bone Sea. Back inside the boat, Li Qie drank a nice cup of tea given to him by Gensher. He smiled at the Taoist. Your junior brother is an interesting fella. The Taoist smiled back. He has always been like this. We grew up together and he's perfect outside of being a bit arrogant and competitive. The Profound Dynasty, in his hands, will be able to shine. The Taoist was much greater than the monarch in terms of talents and power. However, the two had a great friendship. The monarch never held any jealousy towards his excellent senior brother. On the contrary, he felt regret for his brother. In his opinion, the Taoist could compete for the heaven's will and perhaps be the most likely candidate as well. Unfortunately, the Taoist didn't have this ambition. He chose the path of the grand era instead of the heavenly path. More importantly, he never cared for fame and wealth, so despite holding immense power, he was relatively unknown. The monarch himself chose the path of the grand era because of his brother. If someone as matchless as his brother didn't obtain the heaven's will, then it would be too tasteless for an inferior person like him to reach for it. Xueqi smilingly said, "However, your brother is right. If you don't dare to chase after someone you like, it would be an affront towards your innate gifts." The Taoist couldn't find an answer to this comment and let out a hollow laughter. He liked the Golden Era Palace Master. However, as his martial aunt, she was one generation higher than him. This left him in a difficult situation. After all, they were a magnificent sect in heaven's spirit. Countless lineages and charming spirits viewed them as leaders. If he married his martial aunt, it would indeed be improper given his sect's reputation. The Pure Sun Island Lord is incredible regarding cultivation, but unfortunately, you treat a few matters in the way women do. Ruyan chuckled. Just as the profound king has said, if you waste this opportunity, won't you regret it for the rest of your life? Both the Void Imperfection 3 schools and Gu Chun's 4 branches were leading charming spirit lineages as well as allies. The two powers mingled a lot, so Lu Ruyan also knew about the Taoist's love for the Golden Era Master. In fact, this was no secret in the 4 branches. Any disciple with a bit of influence knew about it. The Taoist quietly pondered for a moment before letting out a sentimental sigh. Shortly after, he said, "Morality and ethics, what can people say about them? Even if I can cross this hurdle, my aunt might not be able to." "How can you say that without trying?" Xueqi grinned. "Make an attempt before coming to a conclusion. Plus, your 4 branches aren't that pedantic about morality. Your ancestors, Immortal Emperor Gu Chun, Immortal Emperor Chen Hai, and Immortal Emperor Yan Shi, aren't so old-fashioned in the first place." The Taoist was still hesitant, not knowing how to voice his feelings. Xueqi laughed and patted his shoulder. "Give it a try. The opportunity is in your hands. If you fail to grasp it, it won't be there any longer. If such a day comes, you will regret it, and remember, there is no medicine for regret." The Taoist quietly nodded. Chapter 1333. Meng Zhentian's enticement. As the group was preparing to depart for the Bone Sea once more, someone else came to visit. A bone ship floated from the Bone Sea with 2 people on board, one old and one young. The old man looked extraordinary with a sword on his back. This sword was thick and huge, a great contrast to his own stature. Though he hid his aura, there were sharp glints in his eyes like unstoppable sword strikes, evident by his suffocating sword Dao. As for the youth, many people knew that it was Bao Yujiang from the Dream Empyrean. An older character immediately recognized the old man and blurted, "Chao Guojian. Chao Guojian." Others shuddered after hearing this name. This was Meng Zhentian's youngest disciple. Rumor has it that he became Zhentian's direct disciple after joining the Dream Empyrean during the difficult Dao era. Although Meng Zhentian didn't spend a long period teaching Chao Guojian about cultivation, his talents shined during this arduous generation. It was difficult to find a suitable opponent for him during his youth. Others praised him as the best swordsman in heaven's spirit. Ultimately, he reached the peak by becoming an excellent god monarch. Keep in mind that it was exceedingly difficult to even become a paragon during the difficult Dao era, let alone a god monarch. After this era ended, he eventually became a grand god king. It has been said that if he hadn't been born at the wrong time, he could have become an invincible god king. Even if he couldn't become a 9 worlds god king, he would at least be a world-dominating god king. Chao Guojian disembarked his bone ship and boarded the Evil Devourer School's boat. He told the disciples here, "Dream Empyrean disciple, Chao Guojiao. Under the orders of my master, I am here to see Schoolmaster Lu and Schoolmaster Zhua." Many cultivators slightly trembled after hearing this, especially the experienced ones who smelled something different in the air. Could it be that Meng Zhentian has begun to recruit the heroes of this world? A sect master murmured to himself after making this prediction. Everyone knew that Meng Zhentian wanted to become the immortal emperor. These candidates didn't need to antagonize everyone in the world. In fact, throughout history, many great powers were willing to form an alliance with promising candidates. This sudden visit from Chao Guojian under Meng Zhentian's orders had a different feeling to it. An insightful elder murmured, "If the Void Imperfection 3 schools form an alliance with the Dream Empyrean, he will become a tiger with wings. His path towards immortal emperor will be even easier." Despite being low-key, the Void Imperfection schools were still a behemoth of the charming spirit race and heaven spirit as a whole. It held a pivotal position in the worldly order. If they were to ally with the Dream Empyrean, then not far in the future, the 4 branches might do so as well. If it came down to this, Meng Zhentian would be completely victorious. No one would be able to stop his army. Inside the boat, Ruyan and Zhenshi heard the message from the disciples. Their eyes darted at each other and then Li Qie. In their opinion, their schools would definitely follow Li Qie. He could make any decision in their stead. The Taoist sitting to the side smiled and said, "The guest comes bearing ill will." The Taoist was quite a character, so he naturally understood the reason for Chao Guojian's visit. Li Qie smiled and added, "I like this type of guest the most. Wouldn't it be boring if everyone was agreeable all the time? Only blood and bones will paint the path of an immortal emperor, one full of passion and fun." Li Qie's nonchalant attitude left the 2 girls with helpless smiles. Even someone as restless as Ruyan, a demoness, wasn't a match for Li Qie in terms of bloodthirst and murder. Massacring and clan extermination was just an ordinary meal to Li Qie. It was as if a day without war and blood would be a boring and lonely day. "Don't look at me like that." He shook his head after noticing the stares. "I'm not a murderous demon or butcher, I'm simply stating the truth. The path of an emperor will be paved with dried bones, and even after becoming one, the future will still be full of obstacles and death." The Taoist smiled in response. "Before knowing Brother Li, I might have felt some regret for not choosing the path of the heavens, but now, I think the path of the Grand Era is more suitable for me. With you here, there is no chance for me to become emperor." These words were not uttered carelessly. He truly had the power and talents to reach for the throne. Even if Meng Zhentian came out, he just needed another 3 to 5 years before being able to compete all the same. "Let him in." Li Qie told Ruyan, "If Meng Zhentian won't come, we can still listen to his disciple for a bit." Ruyan followed his instruction. A bit later, Bao Yujiang and Chao Guojian were led inside by the disciples. Yujiang followed his master in. The moment he saw Li Qie, his eyes ignited with rage. He glared at him as if this feud wouldn't end until one of them died. Guojian politely greeted Ruyan and Zhenshi. He found it a bit surprising to see Taoist Pure Sun as well. "So Pure Sun Island Lord is also here? It's a pleasure to meet you." "Don't worry about me, I'm just passing by." The Taoist smiled and left. Guojian cupped his fists before formally taking out a document. He solemnly handed it to Ruyan and Zhenshi while saying, "I have been entrusted the task to visit schoolmasters by my master." The 2 took a look. This was a formal document of communication between great powers with the personal signature of Meng Zhentian. The 3 words Meng Zhentian were majestic and exuded a mighty aura that struck at the face. It was as if he was standing before them. Ruyan accepted the document and cheerfully asked, "What business are you here for, Lord Chao?" Guojian wanted to speak, but he refrained from doing so after seeing Li Qie leisurely sitting there. Zhenshi gracefully said, "Young noble Li and our Void Imperfection schools are on the same side. Lord Chao, you don't have to watch your words." He would be able to leave behind a great legacy in the future. This type of honor was an irresistible temptation. Moreover, the support of the Void Imperfection schools meant that he would also garner the support of the majority of the charming spirit race. Its might would wipe out some of the obstacles in his future. Zhenshi smiled and slightly shook her head in response. "We appreciate Senior Meng's high evaluation of us. However, our 3 schools have always been free and have no intention of competing against the world. Send him our regards." Guojian was stunned after hearing this. He didn't expect her to make a decision this quickly, and definitely not this frank of a refusal. He regained his wits and quickly replied, "Schoolmaster Zhua, there's no need to make a decision right now. My master hopes that your sect can carefully think about the alliance. You should consult the elders before making a decision." Despite the guise of persuasion, this was also a veiled threat. "I can give you a serious response right now. Our schools have no intention of involving ourselves in this competition. I'm not just speaking on behalf of my sacred spring school. My words speak for all 3 void imperfection schools. This was not an impulsive decision or overstepping her authority. In fact, the ancestors from the 3 schools had already given her a clear answer. Li Qie. In their eyes, picking a true whale rider was much better than joining hands with an immortal emperor. Their ancestral whale was already powerful enough, and a whale rider would be able to exert its true power. With this combination, they could sweep through the entire world. Instead of fawning over Meng Zhentian, it was better to pick Li Qie. Moreover, they also thought that he had a great chance of becoming the immortal emperor. Spending these last few days together with Li Qie only made Zhenshi even more determined. Making Li Qie stay with them was more important than anything else. Chapter 1334. Slap Zhenshi's firm attitude and her direct rejection astounded Chao Guijian. He came prepared. As long as the Void Imperfection 3 schools had any intention to form an alliance, many conditions would be negotiable. But now, Zhenshi didn't even bother discussing the conditions. This caught him completely off. Guijian tried again. Schoolmaster Zhua, you should take your time instead of answering right away. Ruyan coldly interrupted him this time. There's no need to think twice. Sister Zhua's words represent my evil devourer school as well as the Void Imperfection schools. Zhenshi's refusal was one thing, but Ruyan's words gave Guijian a hard time accepting the result. All of his preparations and calculations had been wasted. He took a deep breath and told them with great austerity. Schoolmasters, you two should already know that when my master comes out, no one will be able to impede his path. I'm not self-praising or advertising needlessly. No one in this world is qualified for the throne outside of my master. This tone carried great fanfare. However, it was not a shameless boast since it did contain some truth. Even in all of the 9 worlds, few could compete against Meng Zhentian, at least for the next 10 years. Li Qie couldn't help but laugh after hearing this. At this critical juncture, his laughter immediately changed Guijian's expression. He already had quite a prejudice against Li Qie, but he decided to set this enmity aside and prioritize the alliance instead. But now, this untimely laughter seemed to be aimed at their dream Empyrean and his master, Meng Zhentian. Guijian was still quite a character. He didn't immediately turn on Li Qie on the spot and instead coldly asked, "May I ask why you are laughing, young noble Li?" Li Qie chuckled in response. "Nothing, it was just a casual laugh, but since you have asked, I'll answer you. Your master shouldn't dream about the position of immortal emperor." Guijian's expression turned unsightly. Bao Yujiang, who had been posing calmly next to him, suddenly jumped up. Yujiang shouted, "Li, don't be presumptuous. My grandmaster is invincible in the 9 heavens. Just these words alone justify your death without a burial." Li Qie didn't bother glancing at the clamoring youth. Guijian slightly waved his sleeve to calm his disciple before lowering his tone towards Li Qie. "Young noble Li, I have heard of your feud with my disciple. As a senior, I won't involve myself in this feud of the younger generation. I know that you are a great talent. If you join my master, I'm sure you will eventually become a great general. Your feud with my disciple will surely disappear as well. My master has a deep appreciation for geniuses. This is a great opportunity for you to rise." Guijian was an eloquent man who gave off a very generous tone. This manner of conduct befitted his status. However, Li Qie interrupted him and smiled. "Save these words for someone else. Your master alone isn't qualified to recruit me." "You!" Chao Guijian couldn't endure this blatant disrespect. His master could deter the 9 worlds. Who else would be emperor besides him? But today, a junior like Li Qie provoked him to this degree. How could Guijian bear this anger? Yujiang shouted, "Ignorant fool, keep on running your mouth. Master, teach him a lesson, pa." Before he could finish, Li Qie's slap had already blown him away, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. "What are you doing?" Guijian eventually snapped with a grimace. Li Qie faintly smiled. "He said to give me a lesson, so why do I need to be reserved any longer? As his master, is it time for you to teach me a lesson too?" "Li Qie, halt your impudence." Guijian was furious as he uttered, "I might not care about your troublemaking, but this doesn't mean you can act arrogant before me." In this split second, her blood energy surged like a storm. It became several hundred times or even thousands of times stronger while empowering her next destructive slash. Her attack instantly reached its limit like a group of stars exploding. It created an absolute sword domain that came down on Guojian's sword Dao. Clank! The two swords suppressed each other to a standstill. In the past, Guojian's sword Dao had the advantage, but it couldn't advance under Gensher's absolute sword domain. In terms of cultivation, Gensher was indeed not a match for Guojian, who was a grand god king. However, she had a half-completion immortal physique. Once her sacred spring physique activated, she would have boundless blood energy, allowing her power to soar wildly. Even the most ordinary move would become the most domineering and vicious attack due to her endless blood energy. This sacred spring physique could boost one's blood energy to undepletable amounts and last forever. This meant that a cultivator with this physique might not be the most powerful on the battlefield, but they would definitely be the most resilient. Chapter 1335. True Power. While Gensher's absolute sword domain confronted Guojian's sword Dao, Li Qie had already swept Yu Zhang off his feet and held him by the throat. Yu Zhang's eyes turned white as he gasped for air. Li Qie maintained his grip and chuckled. If an ant continues to crawl beneath my feet, wanting to bite, I won't mind stomping it to death. Master, save me. When death was this close, Yu Zhang finally felt fear as he turned pale and begged his master for help. Li Qie, do you really want to become enemies with our dream Empyrean? Guojian was alarmed as well. Even though he was a grand god king, he couldn't quickly defeat Gensher. Moreover, she herself had an immortal emperor life treasure. He had no choice but to shout and reveal his backing when his disciple's life was hanging by a thread. Li Qie, rethink things over. If you kill my disciple today, you will become our enemy. At that point, there will be no place for you left in this world. Guojian's threat was blatant, but it wasn't just an arrogant rhetoric. Many cultivators shuddered after hearing this, including paragons from the previous generation. Killing Meng Zhentian's grand disciple in front of this many people was something unforgivable. Meng Zhentian's power was as clear as day. If he actually became the immortal emperor, one could easily imagine the consequences of being his enemy. Just as Guojian has said, the world might be vast, but there will be no place for them to hide. Thus, one needed to weigh their own ability after hearing such a threat. However, this didn't seem to apply to Li Qie, who only smiled in response. Ruyan also chuckled and emotionlessly said, Lord Chao, is this your personal opinion, or are you representing your master's will? I'm speaking on behalf of my master. He immediately replied, Li Qie, if you seek self-preservation, let go of my disciple right now or face the consequences. He was afraid of breaking the vase while trying to kill the mouse. He couldn't kill Gensher in a short period of time and knew that even if he tried to save Yu Zhang, it would only be pushing him further towards death. Thus, he had to borrow his master's prestige to intimidate Li Qie into sparing his disciple. This was met with a carefree smile from Li Qie. I actually want to see Meng Zhentian's will and if it can save his grand disciple or not. Having said that, he clenched his fingers. A cracking sound resounded along with Yu Zhang's scream. His soul almost left his body from fright as he yelled, Master, save me! Provoking Meng Zhentian, this blatantly left everyone stunned silly. Stop! Behold my master's decree. Having said that, Guojian unrolled a scroll. The word pardon was written on it. The character was written in a majestic manner. Every stroke contained the rhythm of the Tao. It also contained the invincible will of Meng Zhentian since it was handwritten by him. Someone at his invincible level could impart their will into their writing that would then cause others to tremble in fear. Many people's knees uncontrollably shook after seeing this word. It had yet to come down, but its divine aura alone was already enough to instill fear into their souls. One could extrapolate just how powerful Meng Zhentian was from this decree. Everyone held their breaths after Guojian took out the scroll. The atmosphere instantly became oppressive. It wasn't just a decree that represented an invincible will. Keep in mind that Meng Zhentian was still alive and would become the immortal emperor. This meant that anyone who chose not to give him any consideration would be opposing him. An unforgivable feud. No matter who they might be, they must think twice before making this decision. The dignified atmosphere made someone as great as Chao Guojian feel a bit smug. After all, his master's prestige could still threaten the world like before. This will, his master's glory was simply unstoppable, so of course he was proud and arrogant. He had quite a momentum going as he declared, "Schoolmasters, this is my master's inviolable will. If you wish to oppose my dream Empyrean and my master, then invite your own masters first. This relates to your school's future, an existential crisis." At this time, the two sides were about to abandon all pretenses. Earlier, Guajian was still quite polite, but he was now furious after the quick exchange. Their dream Empyrean was on the rise while his master was the sun at noon. Why should he tolerate such disrespect from the void imperfection schools? What's so great about Meng Zhentian's decree? Jianshi was much more graceful, but the demoness Ruyan didn't share this personality. She became irate towards Guajian's threats. Not to mention that he has yet to become emperor, even if he was one, his will does not represent everything. A decree, right? Very well, take a look at my evil devourer school's will. Having said that, a scroll appeared in her hand. With a loud blast, 4 words showed up. World, be exonerated. They flowed as smooth as dancing dragons and phoenixes. Even though the style was refined and graceful, they had an aura capable of assaulting myriad ages. It was an ancient scroll, yet its momentum didn't wither in the slightest. Ruyan was already an unrestrained individual, so in her rage, she directed the decree straight at Chao Guojian. This exoneration decree suppressed the entire region. An ethereal beauty capable of devouring the world seemed to be standing there among the characters. A paragon who knew what it was shouted. The decree of the evil devourer progenitor. Guojian didn't think that Ruyan would immediately fight after a little argument without leaving any room for deliberation. He was shocked and had no choice but to also unleash the decree in his hand against the divine prestige of a grand completion immortal physique user. Boom! The word pardon pierced the sun and flew across the world. A figure emerged within, stealing the brilliance of the celestials as it looked down on all existences. Meng Zhentian's will. Everyone knew who this figure was right away. It represented his unstoppable will. Not only was he powerful, he was still alive. This meant that his will would be even stronger. It made everyone think that the real deal was standing before them. Weaker cultivators couldn't stand straight and had to kneel on the ground as they were unable to handle his pressure. Yet to be emperor but already acting like one. Ruyan sneered. She fearlessly unleashed all the power in her scroll. Boom! This decree seemingly vanished, giving room for a terrifying black hole to appear. The ethereal figure standing in the black hole had her hair fluttering in the wind. She looked around and was ready to devour gods and devils. This was the will of the evil devourer progenitor. Even though she didn't become an immortal emperor, she was an immortal physique user that could assail one. With her will crashing down, Meng Zhentian's figure also erupted and grew incomparably tall. He could seize the stars as well as the entire world in his palm. It was as if his stomp could flatten all things. However, this will couldn't hold up against the physique user. Boom! Under the constant suppression of the progenitor, Zhentian's mighty figure suddenly dimmed. His sky-wearing body slowly shrunk. A big shot murmured to himself, "This is a real grand completion master at the summit." Even if she didn't have this physique, her cultivation back then must have been stronger than Meng Zhentian. This is a real existence capable of hurting an emperor. Both were decrees, but Meng Zhentian's was inferior compared to the evil devourer progenitors. Despite the fact that he was still alive, his decree couldn't resist her will. After all, it was exactly what that cultivator said earlier. She was a true existence at the emperor assailant level. Her cultivation on top of her grand completion immortal physique granted her unfathomable might. Chapter 1336. Merciless Slaughter Rumble. Meng Zhentian's gigantic figure was being pressed down and became smaller and smaller. The word pardon was fading away because of Ruyan's decree. Guojian's expression turned ugly after seeing this. However, he was riding a tiger and couldn't get off. He cried out and summoned a treasure. Under the strengthening of his blood energy, it emitted a powerful battle intent that fused with Meng Zhentian's will, causing it to become much stronger. It was now able to withstand the suppression. This was a treasure personally created by Zhentian. It contained both his powerful merit laws and battle intent. Meng Zhentian really is strong. Many people were trembling after seeing this. Although it might look like a fight between Ruyan and Guojian, it was a confrontation through time between the evil devourer progenitor and Meng Zhentian. Of course, The progenitor won the first exchange even though she was no longer in this world. However, Zhentian had a treasure combined with his will. This allowed his shadow to stabilize the situation and withstand the pressure. Jianshi elegantly asked in the back. Lord Chao, you wish to test our arsenal? Clank. A sword appeared in her hand. In the blink of an eye, an immortal emperor's aura went on a rampage as if an emperor had personally arrived. Boom! Meng Zhentian's figure couldn't withstand this development and collapsed right away. The decree in Chao Guojian's hand suddenly turned into ashes while he staggered backward. His blood energy was churning from the suppression now placed on him. Jianshi's sword was an imperial weapon left behind by immortal Emperor Wu Go. The result had been determined the moment it came out. Meng Zhentian's will was no match for an immortal emperor's. In this brief moment, the scene went silent. Guojian was livid. Jianshi was right. They were comparing their arsenals. Your sect's resources are still too weak. Li Qie chuckled and said, Meng Zhentian himself might be able to do something, but you are only a fox borrowing the might of a tiger by coming here like this. Go back and tell Meng Zhentian that it doesn't matter how strong he thinks he is. He better start acting smart or else during the imperial preselection, I will take off his head and hang it in the highest location in heaven's spirit. With that, he twisted Bao Yujiang's neck. The boy didn't have time to scream. His eyes were wide open in astonishment since he didn't expect Li Qie to dare kill him in front of his master. You! Guojian's anger was unrestrainable. He wildly howled and wanted to rush forward, but Jianshi and Ruyan blocked his path. One person had the decree of the Evil Devourer School while the other had an imperial sword. They activated their half-completion immortal physiques as well. The Evil Devourer physique and the Sacred Spring physique. It was easy to imagine their battle prowess when they had these artifacts with them. Jianshi slowly said, Lord Chao, we have heard of your prestige as a grand god king for a long time now. If you want to fight, we'll entertain you. Ruyan was even more domineering. She grinned and said, Lord Chao, I'm not intentionally belittling you, but even with your great cultivation, you are no match for us without an imperial weapon and only something given to you by your master. The atmosphere became serious and tense to the extreme. It was unfortunate that someone as strong as Chao Guojian had to face Ruyan and Jianshi. The two sisters were already quite mighty, and had stepped into the path of the Grand Era. Moreover, they also had their physiques to back up their cultivations. In the contemporary, they weren't necessarily weaker than the Sea Shield Prince, the Swift Dao God, or the Seven Sea Goddess at all. It was that they preferred to keep a low profile. Guojian didn't have an imperial weapon, so he didn't have an absolute advantage over the sisters. At this time, it was clear to see which sect had more resources. Even though the Dream Empyrean's progenitor was quite mighty, the sect itself never had an immortal emperor. Li Qie smiled and threw Yu Jiang's head to Guojian while flatly declaring, This is my warning. In this generation, no one but me is qualified to be called emperor. With that, he ignored Guojian and went back inside the boat. Guojian was trembling from anger. He initially came for an alliance, but it ended in a feud with the Void Imperfection Schools on top of his disciple's death. In fact, this could have been avoided if it wasn't for Bao Yujiang's remark. Alas, there was nothing he could do since the wheels had been set in motion. He had no choice but to fight at that moment. Everyone was holding their breaths. The scene of Li Qie challenging Meng Zhentian was too shocking. Zhentian was currently untouchable, yet Li Qie had no qualms at all with his domineering and arrogant style. Eventually, Jianshi spoke in a serious tone. Lord Chao, please return. Guojian gritted his teeth and said, Schoolmaster Zhua, you will regret your choice one day. The destruction of the Void Imperfection Schools will be because of this. Lord Chao, thank you for worrying about our schools. Ruyan chuckled. Our choice is our own business. Moreover, you should wait until your master actually becomes an immortal emperor before talking about destroying us because with his current status, we can still easily suppress him. This was a grand declaration. It showed the true power and hidden aces of the Void Imperfection Schools. Many people suddenly realized something. Perhaps the schools still had existences capable of assailing immortal emperors right now. It would be too shocking if this was true. Assailing emperors was a very serious topic. If they still had this type of existence, their schools would be completely unfathomable. Guojian angrily stomped before leaving, not wanting to stay any longer. He would repay this humiliation one day, but his experienced self told him to endure for now. The crowd was contemplating what had just transpired in silence while checking each other's expressions. Someone murmured, "Fierce is domineering and ferocious enough. Chao Guojian won't be the only one angry. I'm afraid Meng Zhentian won't swallow this very easily." An older character wondered, "Is this the prelude to the contest for the throne?" An older paragon from the previous generation explained, "If Li Qie wants to be emperor, he had to take this step." Meng Zhentian's appearance meant that he would become the greatest rival to all the young geniuses who want to be emperor. It was just a matter of time before someone came out to challenge him. Since Zhentian has experienced the last competition, he has an advantage over the other geniuses. Nevertheless, Li Qie is the first challenger. The knowledgeable people knew just how cruel the path towards emperor was. Countless geniuses had been buried, their bones paved the way for the next ruler. Meng Zhentian was an unavoidable mountain for all those who want to become emperor. However, no one expected Li Qie to be the first challenger, and this soon at that. Someone couldn't help but speculate. What is Li Qie relying on in order to compete? Will the peacock tree be his Tao protector? Or perhaps an invincible ancestor from the Void Imperfection schools? In their minds, Li Qie was very powerful, but he still wasn't a match for Meng Zhentian. He was too young. His cultivation wasn't at that level just yet. Given the circumstances, this meant that Li Qie had people strong enough to protect him. Otherwise, he would be killed before being able to do anything. The Taoist commented with emotion after Li Qie came back. "Your domineering style is something I won't ever be able to learn. If you had chosen the path of the heavens, you would have a chance as well." Li Qie glanced at the Taoist and smiled. The Taoist shook his head in response with a wry smile. "No, I am glad to have picked the path of the Grand Era. My talents might allow me to compete with others, but after meeting you, I learned that I would have only become dried bones that pave your path towards invincibility. And I'm sure your path will have more than enough bones, so there's no need to add mine to the pile." He spoke with great confidence while revealing the current balance of the competition. Chapter 1337. After the storm, the group prepared to board a ship for the Bone Sea. This group consisted of Ruyan, Zhenshi, Taoist Pure Sun, Xiong Qianbei, and Fairy. Ruyan was puzzled by this choice. "Why are you bringing Fairy along?" Ever since Fairy got here, she rarely talked to others outside of Li Qie. If she wasn't with him, she would be in her room, alone. It was as if she was out of tune with others. She gave a surreal feeling, one of not belonging to this world. Ruyan looked at the emotionless Fairy and commented, "Maybe she doesn't belong to this world and is an immortal goddess that fell down to the mortal realm." Li Qie only smiled in response. The world doesn't necessarily have immortals or an immortal world. But regardless of whether there were immortals in this world or not, anyone who had seen Fairy before would be amazed and enchanted. If immortals exist, she would definitely be considered one. Taoist Pure Sun was bewildered after seeing her as well. At this time, Li Qie's group was waiting for bone ships. Another group of ships had arrived, but Li Qie chose not to board. Ruyan saw that Li Qie had no intention of boarding as more ships passed by and had to ask, "When are we boarding?" "Waiting for a bigger and sturdier ship," Li Qie answered while staring at the muddled waters. He took out a wooden box and protection talismans before distributing them to the group. "Stick this on your body so the skeletons won't attack you after we get on." These were the talismans he bought from Old Chu. Of course, he was confident in distinguishing good items from fakes. The group took them and remembered his instruction. "A big ship is coming." After a long wait, a great ship capable of accommodating more than 1,000 passengers finally came. It looked as if it was made from a gigantic skull and emitted a dense white glow. There were many skeletons lying on the ship. One was an unknown race with 4 legs and 8 arms. A half-dragon, half-snake creature was present as well among certain gigantic skeletons. It could be said that there were more than just the remains of cultivators on this ship. There were also skeletons of fierce beasts. All the waiting cultivators could only watch. A few big characters from the previous generation couldn't help but lick their lips. Everyone knew that the bigger ships were safer. Of course, the first condition was to take down all the skeletons. Without doing so, climbing on board would simply be suicidal. However, the creatures were stronger on bigger ships. If one wasn't strong enough, it would be a foolish endeavor to board. Thus, as this huge ship approached, people only kept on watching. "Come. Li Chia ordered and jumped up with Fairy. The rest of the group easily made the leap as well. Afterward, they followed Li Chia's instruction and placed the talismans on their bodies. Sure enough, the skeletons didn't move at all. It was as if they didn't notice the intruder's presence. The crowd felt quite envious after seeing the successful boarding. However, it stopped at envy since they didn't dare to follow them. Is that a phoenix skeleton? Ruyan noticed a particular corpse on the deck. It looked like a giant bird. Even though countless years had passed and its bones had been charred, its divinity was still flashing on the broken fragments. It maintained some divinity after the relentless torture of time. One could easily imagine just how powerful and frightening this bird used to be. It isn't that easy to meet a real phoenix in this world. It is a priceless and invincible creature, after all. Li Chia smiled and shook his head. It is already remarkable enough to have some of a phoenix's bloodline. Zhenshi curiously asked, where did these bones come from? Are these experts who have died while adventuring in the Bone Sea? Li Chia answered, not necessarily. In a certain sense, the dead adventurers only make up a small portion here. It was the Taoists' turn to ask questions. I heard the Bone Sea contains mountains of skeletons. Are there any differences between the skeletons here and the ones at the Bone Sea? Why are they on these ships that follow this pattern of going back and forth? Li Chia chuckled at this question. This is a key question. Your 4 branches, starting from Immortal Emperor Gu Chun all the way to Immortal Emperor Yan Shi, could be considered the lineage who has explored the Bone Sea the most. You might not know about this, but they certainly were aware of many things. The Taoist cupped his fists and humbly said, I would like to hear your opinion to have a better understanding. Li Chia smiled and politely refused. I can't answer a few questions because your ancestors have their reasons and plans for not telling their descendants. However, I can answer the last question for you. He stared into the vast sea ahead and continued. The reason why these bone ships go back and forth is that they have no escape. They're unable to leave the Bone Sea. In a certain sense, these skeletons on the ships want to flee from the Bone Sea. Alas, it is but a pipe dream. They want to escape? The group was astounded after hearing this. Xiong Qianbei had to ask. But they're already dead. Is it out of a desire to return to their home to be buried there? A burial at home? Li Chia couldn't help but chuckle. He shook his head and replied, Heaven's spirit isn't their home. What does that mean? Ruyan became curious. They came from other places when they were alive? You are thinking about a different matter entirely. Li Chia slightly smiled. Very few who have died in the Bone Sea are qualified to sit on this particular ship. To be able to get up from the bottom of the sea and onto this ship means that they were extremely powerful. Where did these skeletons come from then? The Taoist's heart skipped a beat as he thought about some old records from his sect. Li Chia avoided the question while calmly commenting. In a very distant era, they were unwilling and full of regret. Because of that, you can see this scene right now. These bone ships drifting in the Bone Sea. Some just travel aimlessly while others might make it to the edge. But in the end, escape is not their fate. Zhenshi asked. Not even one can escape? Li Chia turned quiet for a long time before answering. There are some, but that is far back in the past. Just what kind of skeleton is capable of this then? Ruyan was very interested in this topic. The formation of the Bone Sea had always been an unsolved mystery. Li Chia smiled again but didn't answer this time. While the group was enjoying their chat, Fairy hadn't said anything after boarding. She didn't only look at the skeletons but also tilted her head in contemplation. Her beautiful eyes became incomparably bright and enchanting. However, this flash only lasted for a moment before her pupils became dazed again. She thought quite hard, but nothing came of it. Did you remember anything? Li Chia gently patted her hair as she stood there in a solitary daze. She stared at him with vacant eyes and earnestly replied, I seem to remember something, but it is too vague, nothing specific. He gently said, Some things will come naturally when the time is right. You will remember eventually. Still a bit perplexed, she nodded and eventually spoke. I don't know why, but my heart aches sometimes as if it has happened before. Chapter 1338. The rest of the group stared at the two. They had grown accustomed to Fairy's speech. These two always talked about strange things that only the two of them could understand. Li Chia gently sighed after a long silence. Heartache is good. It shows that your heart is still beating, that you are still alive. Something like this is unbelievable for you, so you should feel happy instead. She quietly asked. Why is it that this pain lasts for so long? Li Chia looked at her but didn't know how to explain it right away. It wasn't good to tell her before the time was ripe, so he softly said, there is always pain and parting in this world. Countless calamities have fallen, and experiencing too much can torture the heart. When you understand why things come and go, you will be able to understand everything. When I understand it all, will the pain go away? She looked at him with her pretty eyes in a serious manner. He found it difficult to answer since he didn't wish to lie to her. In the end, he said, you will find out when that day comes. Fairy gently nodded as her eyes became muddled again. Li Chia walked forward and looked at the old rudder. He smiled and said to the Taoist, go outside and remove your talisman. For what? The Taoist was frightened after seeing this smile. He didn't know what was going on. Fishing inevitably requires bait. Li Chia chuckled. And you are a very fat and delicious bait. Why me? Can I not be the bait? The Taoist replied with a pained expression. What are you afraid of? Li Chia looked at him with disdain. You have the indestructible diamond physique, so how are you going to die? Oh right, don't fall down into the sea because you will drown even if your physique was stronger. Maybe you would be okay if it was at grand completion, but what you have right now won't do. Ruyan smiled and chimed in. Pure Sun Island Lord, you are the leader of the charming spirit race, a hero among men. If you don't want to be the bait, do you want weak women like us to be the bait instead? Schoolmaster Lu, there's no need to praise me so much. I'll just go be the bait then. The Taoist hastily surrendered with a wry smile. He went to the deck and took a deep breath. His body exuded a glow with a buzz. It was glittering as if cast from gold and had a cold metallic sensation. He no longer looked like a living person and more like a diamond sculpture. This was the indestructible diamond physique, one of the 12. It was completely impervious to weapons and all other existences. Some even said that at grand completion, the user would be unkillable regardless of the attack. Of course, this was an exaggeration. However, it was prohibitively difficult to kill a user at grand completion. Some would even argue that it was even harder than killing an immortal emperor. The Taoist's physique was at half completion. In addition to his powerful cultivation, he would always be in an unlosable situation regardless of who his enemies were. After activating his physique, he looked at Li Chia and asked, can I begin? Li Chia nodded and smiled. Go for it, attract them and let them beat you up. The Taoist sighed and took off his talisman. The skeletons on the ship immediately reacted. Red soul flames appeared in their eyes. Click. Crack. Bones clinked together as the skeletons stood up and looked at the Taoist. These various skeletons and their red eyes were quite creepy. It gave the illusion that the victims were stuck in a realm of death. Xiong Qianbei was scared out of his mind and stepped back. Luckily, he had incomparable experts with him, or else he wouldn't dare to come here even with 9 lives. Squeak! A human skeleton took out its saber and slowly walked towards the Taoist. Clank! Once it got close enough, it slashed downward with a celestial slash that flew across the sky. This was a slash that wouldn't disperse for a long period of time. Just how terrifying was this? This saber had signs of rust and withering spirituality. Even though it was once an invincible blade, time had turned it into a piece of scrap metal. Nevertheless, this saber scar in the sky was indicative of the skeleton's power, not the blade. But how could such a creature unleash this terrifying slash? Where was its power coming from? The blade struck the Taoist's body, causing sparks to fly everywhere. The Taoist's metallic body was completely unhurt. Not even a little mark was left behind. It wasn't because the skeleton was weak. A paragon would die instantly if they were struck by such an attack, but not Taoist Pure Sun and his unbelievably powerful physique. Clank! 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 The skeleton unleashed a storm-like barrage on the Taoist. Each slash could sever the void. Sparks went flying, but the Taoist remained unharmed. Screech! The phoenix skeleton also flew up with a cry. It opened its mouth and spewed true sun fire on the Taoist. However, this all-burning flame just seemed like water flowing through him. Roar! The giant beast roared and bolted for the Taoist. Its huge claws slammed into him. His body seemed to be a fly stuck under its might. Its sharpness could destroy a mountain range, but the Taoist was once again untouched by the attack. The rest of the skeletons noticed this anomaly, and all crazily unleashed their onslaught on him. The Taoist hands joined together to form a cross. He let the skeletons attack as they pleased with their sharp claws, blades, spears and poisons. All of these weapons found it difficult to leave a mark on him. Only a wondrous sword left behind a shallow mark. The strongest blow struck his shoulder. One could hear the snap of breaking bones. His shoulder actually caved in. However, the wound suddenly melted like water and regained its original form. Not only was this physique invulnerable, even if a mighty attack managed to harm it, it would recover instantly. This meant that it was impossible to leave behind an injury, let alone kill the user. Xiong Qianbei was a fan to see the Taoist withstanding all of these powerful attacks. Others wouldn't be able to do so. Ruyan and Zhenshi, on the other hand, weren't too surprised to see this physique being so untouchable. They were more curious about the skeletons. Zhenshi commented, "They have been dead for so long now, just a bunch of dried bones without any divinity, so why are they still so strong?" Li Qi'er insipidly replied, "Because this is the Bone Sea. They were very powerful when they were alive. Even as bones, their old power, flesh, and blood were left for this land. Their stubbornness is also eternal, allowing them to be strong. Leaving the Bone Sea would make them lose many things." "Young noble, can you control these skeletons?" Ruyan chuckled with a charming wink. Back at the Warcliff, Li Qi'er controlled many skeletal corpses, so she became curious to see if his ability could affect these skeletons as well. Li Qi'er looked at them and replied, "It's possible, but due to this being the Bone Sea, it would be very problematic. It would require many steps as well as certain necessary items." You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.